Welcome to another quiet journey into the past. Tonight we travel to Victorian England, a time of tall, grand houses, polished silver, and long, echoing hallways. But our story isn't about the ladies and gentlemen who lived in the grand rooms above. It's about the quieter, humbler lives below the stairs, where the warmth of the kitchen fire met the steady rhythm of everyday work. We will follow the gentle routines of a small household staff and perhaps share in a few of their small comforts. The day begins before the sun has fully risen. In the dim grey light of early morning, Mary, the young housemaid, stirs from her narrow bed in the attic. The small window above her lets in just a pale hint of dawn, the glass clouded slightly from the cold night air. She lies still for a moment, hearing the faint whistle of wind as it passes over the roof. Somewhere below, a loose shutter rattles softly against the side of the house. She pulls the blanket closer for just a second longer, feeling the faint weight of it against her legs, but the rhythm of her life does not allow for lingering. She sits up slowly, smoothing her skirt before fastening the buttons of her blouse. Her fingers work by memory. She's done this every morning for years. She ties her apron neatly around her waist, checks that her hair is pinned back, and steps carefully into her worn, comfortable shoes. The stairs from the attic are narrow and steep, each step creaking under her weight. The wooden banister feels cool under her hand. At the bottom of the attic staircase, a small door opens into the main servants' hall, dimly lit by the faint glow of the kitchen fire below. The kitchen smells faintly of bread dough left to rise overnight and of wood smoke curling gently from the hearth. Mrs. Porter, the cook, is already there, her broad figure bent over the range as she stirs a pan of warming milk. Her hands, dusted with flour, move with slow, steady confidence. "Morning, Mary," she says, her voice low and gentle. "Morning," Mary replies, setting down the coal scuttle with a soft thud. She kneels beside the hearth, coaxing the embers into a brighter glow with practiced movements. A few small sparks jump, then settle back into the orange warmth. The first tasks of the morning are quiet and deliberate, laying the fire in the library so that the master will find it glowing when he comes down for breakfast, polishing the silver serving trays until they catch the light just so, brushing away the fine dust that has settled on the shelves and mantels overnight. Mary moves silently from room to room, her footsteps softened by the thick carpets. She notices the faint scent of lavender that lingers from the polish used on the wooden floors, the way the light catches on the edge of a crystal vase in the hallway. She pauses for a moment in the library, taking in the deep, comforting smell of old books, the leather bindings warmed by the fire she has just lit. By mid-morning, the house is beginning to stir. Upstairs, Anna, the lady's maid, moves quietly about the mistress's bedroom, laying out a soft morning gown on the bed. The fabric falls in smooth folds, the lace cuffs resting neatly over the edge. On the vanity, a silver-backed brush and comb sit in perfect alignment, ready for use. Anna checks each detail twice. Nothing must be out of place. Downstairs, the kitchen grows warmer as Mrs. Porter works the dough for the midday pies. The rolling pin moves in a steady rhythm, back and forth, over the pale, smooth surface of the pastry. The sound is soft and repetitive, almost like the breathing of the house itself. A faint scent of butter drifts into the air, mingling with the sharper smell of the coal fire. In a corner of the kitchen, a basket of freshly laundered linens sits waiting. Mary lifts each piece gently, folding it so the edges align perfectly, then placing it back in the basket. The cloth is still warm from the drying rack, and each fold releases a faint scent of soap and sunshine. The hours pass with the same quiet rhythm, polishing the brass doorknobs until they gleam, sweeping the back staircase, arranging flowers in small vases for the dining room. None of the tasks are hurried, each one is done with the same steady care. When the clock in the hallway chimes 2, the servants take their small comfort. Tea time. In the warmth of the kitchen, they gather around the wooden table. The teapot, round and stout, is set in the centre, steam curling from the spout. The cups are mismatched but clean, their porcelain thin at the rim. Mary cradles her cup in both hands, the warmth seeping into her fingers. The tea is strong and dark, softened with a spoonful of milk. A plate of small, sugared biscuits rests beside the pot. After tea time, the work resumes with the same gentle rhythm. The dining table is set for the evening meal, silver polished, napkins folded, crystal glasses catching the last of the daylight. The chairs are aligned with careful precision. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter checks the roast, basting it slowly so the juices glisten on the surface. Mary polishes the serving spoons until her reflection appears faintly in the metal. Outside, the day grows dim. The lamps are lit one by one, their soft glow spilling into the hallways. The air smells faintly of roasting meat, warm bread, and the faint, sweet scent of beeswax from the candles. The evening unfolds without rush. The family dines upstairs, voices muffled by the thick doors. Below, the kitchen grows quieter, the last of the dishes washed and dried, the work tables wiped clean. Mary carries the last basket of folded laundry up to the linen cupboard, her footsteps soft on the thick carpet. At last, when all is finished, she climbs the narrow attic stairs once more. The air grows cooler as she nears her small room. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and sets it on the chair by the bed. The little window above lets in the pale light of the moon. She lies down, the faint scent of lavender soap still clinging to her hands, and listens to the deep, slow breathing of the house as it settles into night. And in the stillness, with the fire banked below and the lamps turned low, Mary drifts into sleep as the great house above and below rests until the morning comes again. Mary sleeps soundly through the night, her breathing slow and steady, the faint creak of the beams above her the only sound. Outside, the wind moves through the bare branches of the trees, rattling them gently against the side of the house. Now and then, a carriage passes on the street, the muffled sound of wheels on cobblestone fading quickly into the stillness. When the morning light returns, it arrives softly, slipping through the small window in her room, spilling across the floorboards in pale ribbons. Mary opens her eyes slowly, not with a start, but with the gentle awareness of someone whose days follow a familiar rhythm. She lies still for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the kitchen far below, the sound of a poker stirring in the hearth, the faint clink of a pot being set on the range. The air is cool against her face as she sits up and swings her feet to the floor. The boards beneath her are cold, but she is used to that, just as she is used to the thin wash of pale sunlight and the quiet in the room. She dresses as she always does, each movement unhurried, each tie and button fixed in its place. She smooths her skirt, ties her apron, and checks her hair, pinning it neatly away from her face. The stairs down are the same as yesterday and the day before, steep, narrow, and faintly creaking under her step. She passes the servants' hall, its long wooden table bare except for a small vase of greenery, and descends into the kitchen where the warmth from the range greets her like an old friend. Mrs. Porter is already there, sleeves rolled to the elbows, preparing dough for the morning bread. Steam rises from the kettle, its quiet hiss blending with the sound of the rolling pin moving back and forth over the floured board. "Morning, Mary," she says again, as she does every day. "Morning," Mary replies, her voice still soft from sleep. The fire in the library needs tending first. Mary carries a small basket of kindling through the still house, the polished floors cool beneath her shoes. She kneels before the hearth, arranging the sticks just so, coaxing the flames to catch. Soon, the warmth begins to spread through the room, the flickering light reflecting faintly off the rows of leather-bound books. From the library, she moves to the dining room. The silver must be checked, the glasses polished until they gleam. She works slowly, holding each piece to the light, turning it in her hands, then setting it back in its place. The air here smells faintly of beeswax and fresh linen, the scent of the tablecloth pressed and ready for later. Upstairs, Anna tends to the mistress's chambers. The curtains are drawn back to let in the morning light, the bed turned down and remade, the gown for the day laid out carefully. The air is scented with lavender water, a gentle fragrance that drifts through the room and down the hall. Back in the kitchen, the bread is baking, its rich aroma mingling with the sharper scent of the coal fire. Mary sweeps the floor in slow, measured strokes, the bristles of the broom whispering against the stone. When she is done, she leans the broom carefully in its place, ready for the next time it is needed. The day moves forward like this, quiet, steady, unhurried. A rug is shaken in the yard, the dust drifting lazily in the air. The The brass doorknobs are polished until they shine, the hallway lamps wiped clean of yesterday's traces. A vase of fresh flowers is carried upstairs, each stem adjusted until it sits just right. When the hall clock chimes 2, it is tea time once more. The cups are set out, the teapot steaming gently on the table. Mary pours her tea slowly, watching the dark liquid swirl and settle before adding a spoonful of milk. She sits with her hands wrapped around the warm cup, the heat seeping into her palms. The sound of the spoon stirring is the only noise in the room. When tea time ends, the pattern continues. The table is laid for dinner, the lamps lit as the daylight begins to fade. The kitchen grows warmer, the smell of roasting meat and herbs filling the air. Upstairs, the rooms are prepared for evening. Fireplaces checked, bed linens smoothed, curtains drawn against the night. And when all is done, Mary returns once again to her little room beneath the roof. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and rests it on the chair. Through the window, the moon hangs pale in the dark sky. She lies down, listening to the gentle settling of the house, the deep quiet that comes only at the end of a long day. And once again, she drifts into sleep, as the house above and below rests in the familiar peace of its nightly slumber, ready to begin again when the morning light returns. The morning light returns, soft and unhurried, spilling across the small attic room in pale streaks. It touches the edge of Mary's blanket, glows faintly on the worn wood of the floor, and settles on the chair where her folded apron rests. The air is cool, but not unfriendly, holding the faint scent of the banked kitchen fire below. Mary blinks in the dim light, her eyes adjusting to the familiar shapes of her little room. For a moment she stays still, listening. Somewhere deep in the house, the muffled thud of a door closing echoes faintly. A moment later, there is the gentle clink of a spoon against a pot, the first sounds of the day's work beginning. She rises slowly, her feet finding the cool boards, her hands smoothing the front of her skirt. The apron is tied as it always is, the bow neat, the straps lying flat. Her hair is pinned with quiet precision, each pin sliding into place with a practiced touch. She moves to the door, her fingers brushing the familiar brass handle before stepping onto the narrow attic stairs. The steps groan softly beneath her as she makes her way down. The smooth wooden banister is cool under her hand, worn by years of use. At the bottom of the stairs, the warmth of the kitchen begins to greet her even before she reaches the doorway. Mrs. Porter is there, sleeves rolled, tending to the morning's bread. The smell of yeast and flour drifts through the air, mixing with the sharper scent of the coal fire. Steam curls gently from the kettle on the range, rising in thin ribbons toward the ceiling. "Morning, Mary," comes the quiet greeting, as steady as the clock on the wall. "Morning," Mary answers, and in its repetition there is something comforting. Her first task is the fire in the drawing room today. The air there is still and cool, the heavy curtains keeping much of the early light at bay. She kneels at the hearth, arranging the kindling with careful fingers, coaxing a small spark to life. When the fire catches, the first soft crackles break the silence, the light spreading across the carpet in slow, warm patches. From the drawing room she moves to the dining room. The table is bare now, but the silver must be checked and polished. She lifts each piece, turning it in the light from the tall windows, her cloth moving in small, deliberate circles. When she sets them back on the sideboard, they gleam faintly, even in the dim light. Upstairs, Anna tends to the mistress's morning preparations. The curtains are drawn open, the bed remade, the small table by the window dusted and set with a fresh vase of flowers, white roses today, their scent subtle but sweet. The gown for the morning's errands, a soft green wool, is smoothed and laid out across the bed. Back downstairs, Mary carries a basket of clean towels from the drying rack. The linen is still faintly warm, the smell of soap and sun lingering in the folds. She stacks them neatly in the cupboard, each pile perfectly aligned. The day moves in its familiar rhythm, dusting the hallway banisters, sweeping the back stairs, shaking the rugs in the yard where the cool morning air brushes her cheeks. The brass handles on the doors are polished until her reflection shimmers faintly on their curved surfaces. When the clock in the servants' hall chimes 2, tea time arrives once more. The teapot is set in the centre of the table, steam fogging the lid. Mary pours her tea slowly, watching the dark liquid swirl before settling into stillness. The cup is warm in her hands, the porcelain smooth beneath her fingers. Beside it rests a small plate with a single oat biscuit, its edges golden. When tea time ends, the dining table upstairs is set for the evening. The silver and crystal are placed just so, the napkins folded with crisp precision. The chairs are adjusted until they align perfectly. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter tends to the roasting meat, the scent of thyme and onion drifting warmly through the air. As the light fades, the lamps are lit one by one. Their glow pools on the polished floors, catching the brass fittings and framed pictures on the walls. The voices from the family's rooms above drift down faintly, no louder than the sigh of a closing door. When the final dishes are washed and dried, Mary makes her way up the attic stairs once more. She unties her apron, folds it, and sets it on the chair by the bed. Through the small window, the moon hangs above the rooftops, pale and still. The house rests in deep quiet, the kind that seems to gather in the corners and along the hallways. She lies down, the day's rhythm settling into the peace of the night, and as her eyes close, the familiar stillness returns, until, as it always does, the morning light returns. The morning light returns, softer than the day before, filtered through a thin veil of cloud. It paints the walls of Mary's attic room in muted shades, the brightness dimmed, the edges of the shadows blurred. The air feels cooler today, the kind of cool that seeps in during the night and lingers in the corners of the room. She lies still for a moment, listening to the muted world around her. There is the faint tap of rain against the glass of her small window. Slow, steady, unhurried. Somewhere far below she hears the kettle begin to hum, a quiet sound that feels almost like part of the morning air itself. The fire downstairs must have been stirred already, for she can catch the faint scent of warmed coal. She sits up slowly, smoothing her skirt before tying her apron with the same neat bow as always. Her hair is pinned back, each pin sliding into place without thought, guided by habit. The attic stairs are cool underfoot as she descends. They creak softly, as though greeting her. Her hand glides over the polished banister, worn smooth by years of touch. When she steps into the warmth of the kitchen, the air feels rich and full after the quiet chill of her room. Mrs. Porter stands at the range, a large pot of porridge simmering gently. The smell is warm and wholesome, a mixture of oats and milk with the faintest hint of cinnamon. The rain taps softly against the small window by the sink, its rhythm blending with the steady ticking of the wall clock. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says, her voice as calm as ever. Mary returns the greeting, a faint smile on her lips. Her first task today is the hall fire. The air there is cool, and the light from the tall windows is soft and grey. She kneels to arrange the kindling, coaxing the flame to life with patient hands. When the fire catches, its gentle crackle fills the space, pushing back the coolness in slow, warm waves. From the hall, she moves to the parlour. The rain outside patters gently against the glass panes, casting faint ripples of sound into the room. Mary dusts the low tables and the carved edge of the mantel, her movements unhurried. The flowers in the vase today are white lilies, their scent delicate and faint, carrying a sense of freshness that seems to brighten even the grey light. Upstairs, Anna draws open the curtains in the mistress's chambers, letting in the muted daylight. The bed is remade with smooth, even folds, the lace at the edges tucked neatly into place. A gown of deep burgundy wool is laid out, the colour rich against the pale quilt. The silver-backed brush and comb sit waiting on the dressing table, their handles polished to a soft gleam. In the kitchen, the scent of baking bread begins to rise. Mary takes a basket of dried laundry from the rack near the fire. The cloth is cool today, the rain having dampened the air overnight, but it is clean and crisp to the touch. She folds each piece carefully, stacking them with practiced precision. The day passes in its quiet rhythm, polishing the door handles until they shine faintly in the lamplight, sweeping the back hallway where muddy footprints have been left from the rain, checking that each lamp glass is clear of smudges. The steady sound of rain accompanies her work, a soft background that makes the house feel even more enclosed and warm. When the hall clock chimes 2, it is tea time. The table in the servants' hall is set with the same familiar cups, the teapot resting in its place. Mary pours her tea slowly, watching the steam curl into the air before lifting the cup to her lips. The warmth spreads through her hands, and the faint hum of rain against the window makes the moment feel even softer. Beside her, a small plate holds a slice of currant loaf, the fruit dotted dark against the golden crumb. After tea time, the dining table is laid for the evening meal. The silver is arranged in its familiar order, each fork and knife aligned perfectly. The crystal glasses gleam faintly in the grey light that lingers before dusk. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter bastes the roast, the scent of rosemary and garlic drifting through the air. As the evening comes, the rain slows to a light patter. The lamps are lit one by one, their glow warm against the cool of the day. The voices from upstairs drift faintly down, mingling with the quiet clink of dishes being cleared. When the last of the work is done, Mary climbs the attic stairs once more. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and rests it on the chair by the bed. Through the small window, she can see drops of rain still clinging to the glass, catching the faint glow of the lamps below. The house is still now, resting in the gentle hush that always comes at night. She lies down, the faint scent of rain still drifting in through the cracks in the window frame. Her eyes grow heavy, her breathing steady, and the day folds quietly into the peace of night, until, as it always does, the morning light returns. The morning light returns, this time sharper and brighter, slipping between the thin curtains in narrow beams. It touches the edge of Mary's quilt, glints faintly off the small brass knob on her cupboard, and spills across the wooden floor in a quiet pattern. The air is crisp today, the kind that makes her cheeks feel cool even before she leaves her bed. She lies still for a while, listening to the early sounds of the house. Somewhere below, there's the gentle scrape of a chair leg, the soft thud of a cupboard closing, and the faint hiss of water heating in the kettle. Farther still, the muted creak of the main staircase echoes faintly upward. When she rises, it is without hurry. Her feet meet the cool boards, and she smooths the front of her skirt before tying her apron neatly in place. Each hairpin slides into her hair with familiar ease, each motion quiet and steady. The attic stairs greet her with their soft, worn creaks. The wooden banister, polished by years of use, feels smooth under her palm. As she reaches the bottom, the kitchen's warmth meets her like a slow tide. Mrs. Porter is already at work, rolling out pastry on the flowered table. The air smells of butter and nutmeg, a rich, comforting scent. Steam rises from the kettle, curling lazily toward the ceiling. "Morning, Mary," comes the quiet greeting, as familiar as the clock's steady ticking. Mary returns it with the same soft tone. Her first task today is the library fire. The air in the room is cool and still, faintly scented with paper and wood polish. She kneels to arrange the kindling, her fingers working with slow precision. When the flame catches, it crackles softly, sending warm light flickering over the rows of books. From the library, she moves to the morning room, where the curtains are only half drawn. She dusts the mantel and polishes the small brass clock that sits at its centre. Outside the window, a pale frost glistens on the garden path, catching the thin sunlight. Upstairs, Anna moves through the mistress's chambers. The bed is remade with fresh sheets, the fabric cool and crisp under her hands. A gown of pale lavender silk is laid out, its folds falling smoothly over the bedspread. The air holds the faint scent of rosewater from the dressing table. In the kitchen, the pastry shells are set aside to cool. Mary takes a basket of clean napkins from the drying rack, folding each one carefully before stacking it in the linen cupboard. The wooden shelves smell faintly of lavender sachets tucked between the piles. The day unfolds in its quiet pattern, dusting picture frames in the hallway, polishing the brass on the stair rail, shaking a rug in the pale sunlight by the back door. Each task flows into the next, the movement slow and unbroken. When the hall clock chimes 2, tea time arrives. The teapot is placed at the centre of the table, its sides misted with steam. Mary pours her cup slowly, the tea swirling in the cup before settling. The warmth seeps into her hands, and she takes a slow sip, letting the familiar taste linger. Beside her sits a small plate with a shortbread biscuit, its surface dusted lightly with sugar. After tea time, the dining table upstairs is set. The silver catches the afternoon light, the crystal glasses lined neatly in their places. The chairs are adjusted until each one sits perfectly in line. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter bastes the roast, the smell of herbs drifting through the warm air. As the evening approaches, the frost outside deepens. The lamps are lit, one by one, their glow soft and golden against the cool air. The family dines upstairs, their voices a faint hum beyond the closed doors. When the last of the dishes are washed and dried, Mary makes her way back to the attic. She unties her apron, folds it, and rests it on the chair. Through the small window, the frost on the rooftops glimmers under the moonlight. The house settles into quiet, its sounds fading into stillness. She lies down, the weight of the day easing into the peace of night, until, as it always does, the morning light returns. The morning light returns, pale but clear, spilling gently into Mary's small attic room. It touches the folded apron on the chair, catches on the brass button of her coat hanging on the hook, and rests along the edge of the window frame. The air is cool, the kind that comes before a day of steady activity. Mary wakes to the faint sound of wheels on cobblestones far below. A cart is making its way down the street, the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves echoing softly. Somewhere in the distance the church bell rings a slow, measured note, marking the hour. She rises, dresses, and ties her apron with the familiar neatness that starts each day. Her hair is pinned, each strand tucked away, and her shoes are laced snugly. The attic stairs greet her with their soft creaks, the banister cool under her palm. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is already moving briskly, her sleeves rolled high. The table is covered in empty baskets and polished scales, ready for the morning's delivery. The scent of warm bread drifts from the oven, mingling with the sharper smell of coal smoke from the range. "Morning, Mary," comes the greeting, steady and warm. Mary nods and returns it with a soft smile. Her first task is to light the fire in the dining room. The air there is cool and the curtains are still drawn. She kneels at the hearth, arranging the kindling until it catches, the first flickers of orange sending a faint warmth into the room. By the time she returns to the kitchen, the market cart has arrived. A boy in a flat cap carries in crates of vegetables, potatoes still dusted with soil, carrots with long green tops, round cabbages stacked neatly together. Another basket holds apples, their skins flushed red and gold. Mary helps place them on the table, the air briefly filling with the crisp scent of fresh produce. The rest of the morning passes in quiet busyness, wiping down the jars on the pantry shelves, placing the apples in rows, stacking the potatoes in their bin. The kitchen grows warmer as a pot of stew begins to simmer, the smell of onion and thyme drifting through the air. When the hall clock chimes 2, the familiar tea time arrives. The table is cleared of baskets, replaced by the teapot, cups, and a small plate of buttered bread. Mary pours her tea slowly, the steam curling upward, and takes her first sip in the same unhurried way she always does. After tea time, the table upstairs is set for the evening meal, silver polished, napkins folded, glasses placed just so. The lamps are lit as the daylight begins to fade, their golden glow softening the edges of the room. When the work is finished, Mary climbs the attic stairs, unties her apron, and folds it neatly. Through her window, the rooftops glow faintly under the moonlight. She lies down, the gentle ache of the day's work settling into her limbs, and the house grows still around her, until, as always, the morning light returns. The morning light returns, brighter than usual, spilling over Mary's bed and making the wooden floor gleam. The air feels lighter today, touched with a faint warmth even in the early hour. A bird sings somewhere outside, its clear notes drifting in through the small window. Mary wakes to the sound of quiet footsteps below, the measured pace of someone moving through the kitchen. The faint clink of crockery reaches her, mingling with the distant hum of the street outside. She dresses, ties her apron, and pins her hair in the same practiced order. The attic stairs creak beneath her as she descends, her hand sliding along the polished banister. In the kitchen, sunlight streams through the window above the sink, catching on the polished copper pots hanging along the wall. Mrs. Porter is slicing bread, the crust crisp and dark from the morning's baking. The scent is rich and warm, filling the air. "Morning, Mary," she says, glancing up with a faint smile. Mary returns the greeting as she moves to begin the day's first task. The library fire is tended first. The air in the room is cool, but the tall windows glow faintly with the sunlight outside. As she arranges the kindling, a thin beam of light falls across the carpet, dust motes drifting lazily through it. From the library she moves to the morning room. The curtains are drawn wide today, letting the sunlight spill in fully. The light dances on the polished wood, and the air feels fresh, carrying the faint scent of the garden beyond. Mary dusts the side table, her movements slow, pausing now and then to glance at the small bright flowers in the vase, yellow daffodils, newly opened. Upstairs, Anna draws the mistress's curtains back completely, filling the room with the same golden light. The gown for the day, a soft cream muslin, is laid out neatly on the bed, its fabric catching the glow. The kitchen, too, seems brighter. Mary folds freshly laundered napkins near the window, the light falling over her hands and the pale linen. Outside, she can hear the occasional clip of a horse passing on the street, mingling with the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. When the hall clock strikes 2, tea time feels almost cheerful. The teapot sits in the centre of the table, steam rising in a pale ribbon. Mary sips her tea slowly, the sunlight pooling over the wooden table, making the cups and saucers gleam. Beside her sits a slice of sponge cake, its pale crumbs soft and sweet. After tea time, the dining table upstairs is set in the glow of the late afternoon sun. The crystal glasses catch the light, scattering it across the white cloth. The silver, freshly polished, gleams warmly. As the day fades, the golden light deepens to a softer hue, the lamps lit one by one. The house grows quieter, settling into its evening rhythm. Mary climbs the attic stairs at the day's end, unties her apron and folds it neatly. Through her window, the last traces of sunlight fade into the deep blue of night. The house rests, still and content, as she closes her eyes, until, as always, the morning light returns. The morning light arrives in a softer way today, filtered through a heavy blanket of fog. It turns the view from Mary's attic window into a pale blur, where rooftops and chimneys are little more than faint shapes in the mist. The air feels damp and cool, carrying the faint scent of wet stone. She lies still for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the street below. The usual clop of a horse's hooves sounds muffled, as though wrapped in cloth. Somewhere far off, a cart door closes with a dull thud, the noise quickly swallowed by the fog. Mary dresses slowly, tying her apron with her usual precision and pinning back her hair. The attic stairs creak faintly beneath her, and the cool of the banister seeps into her palm. The kitchen is already warm, Mrs. Porter standing at the range with a steaming pot of broth for the day's luncheon. The smell is rich and comforting, filling the air with the warmth the outside world lacks this morning. "Morning, Mary," comes the greeting, and Mary returns it with a small nod and smile. Her first task is to tend the library fire. The air in the room feels colder than usual, the fog outside pressing against the tall windows. She arranges the kindling carefully, the first sparks catching and sending out a faint, steady crackle. The morning passes quietly. The brass lamps in the hall are polished until they gleam faintly even in the dim light. Mary dusts the high shelves in the parlour, her movements steady and unhurried, the soft brush barely making a sound. When the hall clock strikes 2, tea time feels especially welcome. The table is set with the usual cups, the teapot steaming gently at the centre. Mary pours her tea slowly, the warmth rising toward her face, chasing away the cool dampness that lingers from the morning. Evening comes early in the fog, the lamps glowing softly against the grey haze at the windows. The house settles into its nightly rhythm, the sounds of the street fading almost completely. By the time Mary climbs to her attic room, the mist has thickened outside, wrapping the house in quiet. She lies down, the fog pressing softly against the window panes, and the world beyond feels far away. The first light of morning glances off the freshly scrubbed boards of Mary's small room, making them shine faintly. A faint scent of soap lingers from the day before, a reminder of the quiet work that filled the afternoon. The air is cool, the kind that makes her fingers tighten around the edge of the blanket for a moment before rising. She dresses with her usual care, apron tied neatly, hair pinned into place. The attic stairs sigh beneath her feet, and the smooth wood of the banister slides easily under her hand. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is preparing batter for the morning's griddle cakes, the smell of warm milk and nutmeg drifting into the air. The copper pans above the range gleam in the faint light, their polished surfaces catching each flicker from the fire. "Morning, Mary," she says, and Mary replies with the same soft tone. Her first duty is the dining room fire. The curtains are drawn back today, letting in a stream of pale light that falls across the polished table. She kneels at the hearth, coaxing the flames to life, the crackle of the fire mingling with the faint scent of beeswax from the freshly buffed floor. The morning's tasks include dusting the picture frames in the long hallway, each one given a slow, careful wipe until the glass is clear. The floor beneath her feet feels smooth and clean, the light gliding over its surface. When the clock in the servants' hall chimes 2, tea time is ready. The teapot sits warm in the centre of the table, steam curling gently upward. Mary cradles her cup, the porcelain warm in her hands, the taste of the tea deep and steady. The afternoon passes with the quiet rhythm she knows so well, laying the table, polishing the silver, folding a stack of fresh napkins. By evening, the house feels warm and orderly, the faint scent of polish still clinging to the air. Mary climbs to her attic, unties her apron, and looks once at the soft gleam of the floor in the moonlight before settling into bed, letting the stillness take her. The morning light slips gently into Mary's attic room, touching the edges of the small dresser and the folded apron waiting on the chair. There is a faint hum of extra activity in the house today, a slightly quicker pace of footsteps below, the sound of doors opening and closing. Somewhere in the distance, she hears Anna's voice speaking in low tones, carrying a note of polite formality. Mary dresses and pins her hair in the familiar way, tying her apron into a neat bow. As she descends the attic stairs, the wood creaks softly beneath her feet, the polished banister cool to the touch. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is already busy with preparations for the day's luncheon. The table is covered in ingredients, fresh herbs, carrots, and a side of ham waiting to be roasted. The air smells rich with the beginnings of the day's work. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says, not looking up from the chopping board. Mary returns the greeting, sensing the extra weight in the day's tasks. Her first job is to light the fire in the drawing room. The curtains have already been pulled back, letting in the cool morning light. She arranges the kindling carefully, striking the match with steady hands until the small flame catches. By mid-morning, the house is filled with gentle movement. Anna passes through the hall carrying a tray of tea upstairs for the guests' chambers, her steps quiet on the carpet. Mary polishes the silver tray that will be used for the afternoon tea service, her cloth moving in slow circles until the surface gleams. The hall clock chimes 2, and the kitchen table is set for the servants' own tea. Mary pours hers slowly, the steam curling upward, while Mrs. Porter glances toward the doorway as if listening for the bell that might call her upstairs. The afternoon is spent ensuring every room is in perfect order, plumping cushions, checking the lamps, straightening the rug in the guest room so that its edges lie smooth. By evening, the guest is dining with the family upstairs, the faint sound of conversation drifting down the staircase in a low, muffled hum. When the last of the dishes are dried and the table linens folded away, Mary climbs to her attic room. She closes her eyes, knowing tomorrow will follow the same steady rhythm, though tonight the house holds the quiet presence of someone new. The morning begins with a pale, silvery light filling Mary's room. Her breath curls faintly in the cool air, and when she sits up, she can see a thin layer of frost on the inside edge of the window pane. Beyond the glass, snow has fallen in the night, softening the shapes of rooftops and blanketing the garden path in white. The house is quieter than usual, as though the snow outside has muffled the very sound of the morning. Mary dresses quickly, tying her apron and pinning her hair with practiced speed to ward off the chill. The attic stairs are cold under her feet, the banister smooth and cool to the touch. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is standing close to the range, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. The smell of porridge fills the air, rich and comforting, with a faint dusting of cinnamon. "Morning, Mary," she says, her breath still faintly visible in the cool air near the door. Her first task is the library fire. The tall windows there are edged with frost, the world beyond blurred in white. She kneels at the hearth, arranging the kindling and coaxing the flames until the crackle of fire warms the air. The morning is spent dusting and polishing in rooms that feel a little dimmer in the soft winter light. Mary pauses once by the back door to watch the snow falling again, each flake drifting slowly, soundlessly, onto the already white ground. Tea time arrives, the warmth of the cup especially welcome on a day like this. The steam fogs her view of the window for a moment, the cold world outside disappearing into a soft blur. By evening, the lamps glow warmly against the deepening blue of the snowy night. The scent of roasting meat fills the air, mingling with the faint smell of burning coal from the fires in every hearth. When the day's work is done, Mary climbs to her attic room. She looks out at the rooftops, blanketed in white, the moonlight making the snow glisten. The sight is still, almost timeless, and as she lies down, the hush of the snow seems to follow her into sleep. The morning begins with the sound of rain tapping steadily on the roof above Mary's small attic room. It is not a hurried rain, but a patient one, falling in an even rhythm that seems as though it could go on all day. Through her small window, the garden path is darkened with wet, and the stone walls glisten faintly in the dim light. Mary rises slowly, the cool air making her draw the blanket around her shoulders for a moment before dressing. Her apron is tied with the same practiced neatness, and her hair is pinned back before she makes her way down the narrow stairs. The kitchen smells faintly of soap today. A large tub stands near the hearth, steam rising from the hot water within. Mrs. Porter is busy with breakfast preparations, but a stack of laundry sits nearby, ready to be washed despite the rain outside. "Morning, Mary," she says, as though the weather has not touched her mood in the slightest. Mary's first task is to light the fire in the morning room. The rain blurs the view from the windows there, the garden beyond softened into greens and greys. She arranges the kindling, coaxing the flame until it burns steadily, adding a little more warmth to the damp day. Much of the morning is spent near the kitchen, wringing out linens and hanging them on lines strung across the drying room. The smell of damp cloth and clean soap fills the air, mixing with the gentle hiss of the range. Outside, the rain continues its steady rhythm, a sound that seems to settle into the bones of the house. Tea time arrives, and the warmth of the cup feels especially welcome on such a grey day. Mary sips slowly, the steam from the tea mingling with the faint scent of the wet laundry hanging nearby. The afternoon passes with small tasks, polishing a brass candlestick, folding dry linens, brushing the entryway rug to catch any stray drops from wet boots. By evening, the rain has softened to a drizzle, the garden path glistening in the light of the lamps. When the last of the laundry is taken in, Mary climbs to her attic room. The patter of rain against the window is steady and low, a sound she will fall asleep to without even trying. Day 8, spring cleaning morning. The morning light today is bright and full, spilling across Mary's small room and catching on the edges of the wooden floorboards. The air feels fresh, touched with the faint scent of the open garden beyond the house. From her window she can see the first blossoms beginning to show in the trees, their pale petals moving gently in the breeze. She dresses with quiet energy, tying her apron and pinning her hair before stepping onto the attic stairs. The wood creaks under her feet, and the smooth banister slides coolly beneath her hand. In the kitchen, the back door stands open just a little, letting in a draught of fresh air. Mrs. Porter has already set bread to rise, the covered bowl sitting near the hearth. A bucket of warm water and a stack of rags wait nearby, the unmistakable sign of a cleaning day. "Morning, Mary," comes the familiar greeting, and Mary nods in reply. Her first task is dusting the high shelves in the library. A small ladder is brought in, and she climbs carefully, her cloth moving in long, deliberate strokes. The sunlight from the tall windows catches motes of dust in the air, making them sparkle faintly before settling again. Later, the rugs are taken into the garden to be beaten, each strike sending a puff of dust into the morning breeze. The sound is steady and measured, the smell of the clean air mixing with the faint scent of old wool. Tea time comes with a sense of satisfaction, the kind that follows a morning's good work. Mary sips her tea while the windows stand open, the sound of distant birdsong drifting in. The afternoon brings polishing, the banisters, the handles of the cupboards, even the hinges on the kitchen door. By the time the lamps are lit, the whole house seems to hold a faint, fresh scent of soap and polish. Mary climbs to her attic that night with the faint ache of a day well spent in her arms. Through the open window, the evening air is soft and mild, carrying with it the faint perfume of the early blossoms outside. The morning begins with a steady brightness spilling through Mary's attic window. The air feels lively, touched with the faint sound of activity from the street below. Through the glass, she can see the blurred shapes of people moving past, and somewhere not far away, the rattle of a cart over cobblestones. Mary dresses quickly, ties her apron and pins her hair before stepping onto the attic stairs. The polished wood creaks softly beneath her shoes, and her hand runs along the smooth curve of the banister. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is checking a list written neatly in ink. A stack of empty crates waits by the door, ready to be filled with the day's supplies. "Morning, Mary," she says, glancing up before returning to her list. Mary nods and begins her first task, lighting the fire in the dining room. The curtains are already open, letting the pale sunlight fall across the long table. She kneels at the hearth, arranging the kindling until the fire begins to glow, the warmth slowly pushing into the cool air. By mid-morning, the delivery cart arrives. 2 men carry in wooden boxes of vegetables, carrots with long green tops, round onions still faintly scented of the soil, apples and pears piled in wicker baskets. A large sack of flour is brought in and set down with care beside the pantry door. Mary helps unpack, stacking each item in its proper place. The air is briefly filled with the mixed scents of fresh produce, burlap, and the faint sweetness of ripe fruit. When the hall clock chimes 2, the kitchen table is cleared of crates and set for tea time. Mary pours her cup slowly, the steam rising into the afternoon light from the window. A slice of fresh bread, still warm from the oven, rests on her plate, the butter melting slowly across it. The rest of the day moves at a steady pace, folding the empty sacks for storage, polishing the brass scales in the pantry, checking that the vegetables are all stored neatly away. By evening, the house feels full and ready, the quiet order restored. When Mary climbs to her attic that night, she feels the faint ache in her arms from carrying crates and baskets. The thought is a comforting one, and she drifts to sleep with the image of the neatly filled pantry in her mind. The morning light enters Mary's room gently, the air carrying a stillness that only comes on a Sunday. The street outside is quiet. No market carts, no clatter of deliveries, only the occasional distant toll of a church bell. Mary rises slowly, her movements unhurried. She ties her apron and pins her hair before descending the attic stairs, each creak of the wood sounding clear in the morning quiet. The kitchen is calmer than most mornings. Mrs. Porter stands by the range with a pot of tea already brewing, a plate of small scones cooling on the table. "Morning, Mary," she says, her voice low in the hush of the day. Mary smiles faintly and answers in kind. There are fewer tasks today, just the gentle tending to the fires, a light dusting in the main rooms, and polishing the silver in the dining room. The curtains in the drawing room are pulled wide, letting the mild sunlight spill over the armchairs and across the carpet. By mid-morning, Anna passes through on her way upstairs with a tray of tea for the mistress. Her steps are quiet, her pace slower than on other days. The house seems to breathe in a softer rhythm, every movement careful and measured. When the hall clock chimes 2, tea time arrives without hurry. The servants' table holds the usual cups, the teapot in its centre, and the warm scones set out neatly on a plate. The sound of rain is absent today, only the faint rustle of leaves from the open back door drifts into the kitchen. The afternoon is spent in light work, folding fresh linens, checking that the lamps are filled with oil for the week ahead, straightening the hall rug so that its edges align with the polished floorboards. By evening, the whole house seems quieter than usual, the rooms above holding only the softest murmurs of conversation. The fires burn low, the light dimming into a golden glow. Mary climbs to her attic, unties her apron and rests it on the chair. Through her window, the rooftops are still under the soft glow of the setting sun. The quiet of Sunday settles deep into the house, and as Mary closes her eyes, she feels the gentle certainty that tomorrow will begin the familiar rhythm once more. The next morning begins with a soft, pearly light spilling into Mary's attic room. It falls across the edge of her quilt and touches the smooth wood of the chair where her apron rests, neatly folded from the night before. The air feels cool and still, the kind of stillness that suggests the day will move at its own gentle pace. She wakes slowly, her eyes adjusting to the pale light. Below her, the first faint sounds of the house are stirring, the muted creak of a floorboard, the faint rattle of a latch being lifted, the quiet sigh of the kitchen range as it warms. These sounds are as familiar to her as her own breathing. Mary dresses in the soft half-light, buttoning her blouse, smoothing her skirt, and tying her apron into its perfect bow. Her hair is pinned back with quiet precision, each strand tucked neatly into place. The attic stairs greet her with their usual soft groan, and the banister, smooth from years of hands, slides cool beneath her palm. When she steps into the kitchen, the air is already carrying the rich scent of baking bread. Mrs. Porter stands at the table, kneading dough with slow, steady movements. The copper pans above the range catch the pale morning light, gleaming softly. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says without looking up, her tone calm, as though they have spoken these same words for a lifetime. Mary returns the greeting, her voice equally soft. Her first task is in the parlour today. The curtains are drawn back, letting the light spill across the carpet and the low tables. She dusts the mantel, her cloth gliding over the polished wood, and wipes the small brass clock that ticks quietly in its place. Through the window she sees the faint shimmer of dew on the garden grass, each drop catching the morning sun. By mid-morning, the air in the kitchen has grown warmer. A tray of biscuits is cooling on the sideboard, their sweet scent mingling with the smell of fresh bread. Mary gathers a basket of linens from the drying rack and folds them at the table, each fold neat and precise, the fabric still faintly warm from the fire. The hall clock strikes 2, its steady chime carrying through the quiet of the servants' hall. Tea time comes as it always does. The table set, the teapot resting in its centre, cups ready and waiting. Mary pours her tea slowly, watching the deep amber swirl before settling. Beside her sits a small plate with a single biscuit, the surface dusted lightly with sugar. The afternoon is spent polishing the brass fittings on the doors, their curved surfaces catching the light as she works. The hallway floor is swept and the stairwell lamps are wiped free of any smudge. The air is filled with the faint scent of polish and the low, steady sound of the house moving through its day. By evening, the lamps are lit and the dining table is set, the silver laid out in perfect order. The voices from upstairs drift down in soft murmurs, the firelight in the kitchen flickering gently against the walls. When Mary climbs the attic stairs at the end of the day, the faint ache in her arms is the same familiar one she feels most nights. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and sets it on the chair. Through the window, the rooftops are dark against the pale sky, and a thin crescent moon hangs above the chimneys. She lies down, letting the day fade into the hush of night, knowing the quiet rhythm will guide her again when the morning comes. The morning comes softly, the first light touching the corners of Mary's small attic room. It stretches across the floorboards, warming the wood in pale gold, and slips over the chair where her folded apron waits. The air feels calm, with no wind outside, only the faint, distant sound of a horse passing along the street. Mary wakes to the gentle creak of the house settling into its day. Somewhere below, she hears the faint scrape of a chair across the kitchen floor and the muted clink of a spoon against a teacup. The sounds are as much a part of her mornings as the tying of her apron or the pinning of her hair. She dresses without hurry, her hands moving with the same practiced motions they always do. Button, smooth, tie, pin. The narrow attic stairs greet her with their familiar soft groans, and the polished banister glides under her fingers. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is tending to a pot on the range, steam curling slowly into the air. The smell is hearty and warm, a broth for the midday meal. On the table, a small dish of eggs rests beside a loaf of bread, and the copper pans gleam faintly in the morning light. "Morning, Mary," comes the familiar greeting, and Mary answers in the same gentle tone. Today her first task is in the dining room. The curtains are half drawn, letting a muted light spill over the long table. She checks the silver, lifting each piece to the light, polishing in small circles until the surface catches and holds the glow. The crystal glasses are wiped with a soft cloth, their edges ringing faintly when touched. By mid-morning, the hallway smells faintly of lavender polish. Mary kneels to dust the lower shelves in the library, her movements slow and careful, the cloth gliding over the spines of the books. The fire there burns low but steady, its warmth reaching gently into the room. The hall clock chimes 2, and the servant's tea is laid out, as it always is. The teapot sits in the middle of the table, steam fogging its lid. Mary pours her cup and cradles it between her hands, the heat sinking into her fingers. A small slice of fruitcake sits on the plate beside her, the candied peel bright against the dark crumb. The afternoon drifts on quietly, sweeping the back steps, checking the lamps in the hallway, folding a stack of freshly ironed napkins. The air grows softer toward evening, the light outside turning to a pale gold. By the time the lamps are lit, the table is set for supper upstairs, the cutlery aligned perfectly, the napkins folded crisp and clean. The low hum of voices above drifts faintly down to the kitchen, mingling with the quiet hiss of the range. When the day's work is done, Mary climbs the stairs to her attic once more. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and rests it on the chair. Through her window, the sky is fading into a deep blue, the first stars showing faintly between the rooftops. She closes her eyes, letting the stillness of the house settle around her, the day sliding quietly into night. The first light of morning reaches gently into Mary's attic room, brushing the edges of the quilt and glancing off the small brass latch of the window. The air is still cool, and the faint smell of the banked kitchen fire drifts upward from below. There is a hush in the street outside, broken only by the slow clop of a single horse passing in the distance. Mary stirs beneath the blanket, opening her eyes to the soft light. The familiar sounds of the waking house reach her, a drawer closing, the low hum of voices in the kitchen, the steady tick of the hallway clock far below. Each sound folds easily into the start of her day. She dresses without thought, the motions as much a part of her as breathing, fastening buttons, smoothing her skirt, tying her apron into a neat bow. Her hair is pinned, each strand tucked firmly in place. The attic stairs greet her with their gentle creak, and her hand glides over the polished wood of the banister as she descends. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is already preparing breakfast. The smell of oats warming in milk fills the room, touched with the faint sweetness of honey. The copper kettle hums softly on the range, sending a thin stream of steam toward the ceiling. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says, her voice quiet but steady. Mary answers with the same calm tone, the exchange as familiar as the turning of the seasons. Her first duty today is the morning room. The curtains are drawn open to let in the pale light which falls over the writing desk and the low table beside the hearth. Mary dusts the edge of the mantel, her movements unhurried, the soft swish of the cloth the only sound in the stillness. The fire here is small but steady, giving the room a faint, pleasant warmth. By mid-morning, she is in the hallway, polishing the brass doorknobs until they catch the light like small suns. The scent of polish lingers in the air, blending with the faint aroma of baking bread from the kitchen. The hall clock chimes 2 and tea time begins. The teapot is placed on the servant's table, steam curling upward from beneath the lid. Mary pours her tea slowly, watching the amber liquid settle before lifting the cup to her lips. On the plate beside her rests a small scone, the butter melting gently into its crumb. The afternoon passes in its quiet pattern, sweeping the back hall, folding fresh towels for the linen cupboard, dusting the frame of a mirror until the glass shines. Outside, the light softens, and the air cools as evening approaches. When the lamps are lit, the dining table upstairs is already prepared, the silver arranged in its familiar order. The muffled sounds of the family above drift down to the kitchen, mingling with the gentle crackle of the fire. Mary climbs the attic stairs at the end of the day, her steps slow with the comfortable weariness of work well done. She folds her apron neatly on the chair, then looks once through the window at the rooftops resting under the early stars. The house is still, and the night wraps itself around her as she closes her eyes. The morning light drifts into Mary's attic room later than usual, softened by a thin veil of clouds. It spreads slowly across the wooden floor, warming one small patch near the bed before it reaches the chair where her apron rests. From the street below comes an unfamiliar sound, the quick, cheerful whistle of a passing postman. Mary stirs, listening for a moment. The house is not quite as quiet as usual. Somewhere in the kitchen there's the faint scrape of something heavy being moved, followed by Mrs. Porter's low voice calling for someone in the scullery. The smell of baking isn't in the air yet. Instead, there's the sharper scent of freshly scrubbed floors, the soap faint but clear even this far up the stairs. She dresses, tying her apron a little tighter than usual and pinning her hair into place. The attic stairs feel cool underfoot, and the banister has a faint tackiness from the polish it received yesterday. When she steps into the kitchen, she finds Mrs. Porter wiping her hands on her apron, her cheeks flushed from work. A delivery of coal has just arrived, and a small pile of it waits by the back door, leaving a dusting of black on the flagstones. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says, her voice carrying just a touch more briskness than usual. Mary returns the greeting, her eyes flicking toward the back door, where the damp smell of coal mingles with the faint tang of the cool morning air. Her first task is in the library today. The curtains are still closed, so the firelight glows warmly in the dim room. She dusts the desk, pausing for a moment over an open letter left there. Not to read it, of course, but because the handwriting is neat and curling, the ink still fresh enough to carry a faint scent. By mid-morning, she is in the main hallway, and the postman's whistle sounds again, closer this time. Anna passes her with a folded note on a small silver tray, bound for the mistress upstairs. The air is full of faint movement, not hurried, but carrying just enough energy to feel different from the day before. When the clock in the servants' hall strikes 2, tea time feels like a small pause in a busier rhythm. The teapot sits steaming at the centre of the table, beside a plate of currant buns. Mary pours her tea and spreads butter over one of the buns, the currants soft and sweet against the warm bread. The afternoon brings more variety than most. The coal delivery means the scuttle must be filled and placed beside each fireplace, leaving a faint trail of coal dust on her apron that she brushes away with the flat of her hand. Outside, the clouds thin, and a pale shaft of sunlight finds its way through the landing window, lighting the brass handrail so it glows. By evening, the dining table is set, but the lamps seem brighter tonight, their glow catching the crystal in sharper patterns. The family's voices drift down, joined by the lighter tone of a guest's laugh. Someone has joined them for supper. When Mary climbs to her attic room, the air feels fresher, as if the house itself has taken a deep breath after a day of busier movement. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and lets her eyes rest on the moonlit rooftops before lying down, the hum of the day still faint in her ears. The morning light arrives pale and silvery, spilling into Mary's attic room in a way that makes the edges of everything seem softer. The blanket, the chair, the folded apron. The air is cool with a faint dampness that clings to the window glass. Somewhere below, the faint clink of china carries up the stairs, followed by a light, unexpected sound, the quick ring of the front doorbell. Mary sits up slowly, listening. The bell isn't usually rung so early in the day. It sounds again, once, and then the muffled voice of Anna floats upward, polite and low. She dresses and ties her apron, the routine steady, but her mind lingers on the sound of the bell. The attic stairs creak under her feet, and she runs her hand along the polished banister as she descends. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is standing with her hands on her hips, looking toward the hallway with raised brows. "Morning, Mary," she says in her usual way, though her voice carries a note of curiosity. On the table, the bread dough waits to be kneaded, dusted with flour, but beside it sits an unfamiliar parcel, wrapped neatly in brown paper and tied with twine. Her first task is in the dining room, where the light has a gentle glow through the tall windows. She polishes the cutlery, setting each piece into its place. But as she moves to wipe the crystal glasses, her cloth catches slightly on the rim of one, and with a faint, sharp sound, the glass develops a thin crack along one side. She freezes for a moment, her fingers holding the fragile stem. It is not broken, but the floor glints in the light. She places it aside with care, her movements even slower now, the rest of the work done with quiet concentration. By mid-morning, the parcel from the kitchen has been carried upstairs, and the hallway smells faintly of lavender. Whatever it contains must be scented. Anna passes through, her expression unreadable, but her pace brisk. The hall clock strikes 2, and tea time comes like a welcome pause. The teapot is warm in the centre of the table, a small plate of oat biscuits beside it. Mary sips her tea, the quiet hum of rain beginning against the windows. The afternoon is taken by the usual work, though the cracked glass lingers at the back of her mind. She polishes the brass fittings in the library, sweeps the back hallway, and lays a fresh rug near the servants' entrance. Outside, the rain falls a little harder, its rhythm steady against the glass. By evening, the table upstairs is set without the missing glass, the arrangement still neat and gleaming under the lamplight. The voices above are soft and even, and the rain begins to ease. When Mary climbs to her attic room, she glances once at the rooftops, damp and shining in the moonlight. She unties her apron and folds it with care, the events of the day quieting in her mind as she settles into the stillness of the night. The morning begins with a clear, soft light spilling across Mary's attic room. It warms the edge of the folded apron on the chair and glances off the small mirror propped neatly against the wall. The air is cool, with the faint scent of fresh air drifting in through the slightly open window, unusual for this time of year. Mary wakes to the sound of slow, measured footsteps on the floor below, then the gentle knock of a door closing upstairs. A moment later, Anna's voice carries faintly up the staircase, speaking in careful, clipped tones. She dresses, tying her apron with her usual precision, pins her hair, and descends the narrow attic stairs. The wood creaks under her weight, and the polished banister slides smoothly beneath her hand. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is stirring a pot on the range, but she is not alone. Anna is there too, holding a small slip of paper in her hand. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says in her usual calm tone. Anna glances at her and adds, "The mistress would like something different for her room today, a vase of blue delphiniums." The name hangs in the air like something delicate and rare. Mary nods, though she has never arranged those particular flowers before. She lights the fire in the drawing room, the kindling catching with a soft crackle, before making her way to the small conservatory at the back of the house. The conservatory is warm and damp, its air rich with the scent of soil and green leaves. She searches among the potted plants, finally finding the tall stems of blue delphiniums, their blossoms a deep, almost shimmering shade. She carries them carefully, their petals brushing lightly against her sleeve. By mid-morning, the flowers are arranged in a tall glass vase on the mistress's dressing table, their vivid colour standing out against the pale lace of the curtains. Anna nods approvingly, adjusting one stem just slightly before stepping back. When the clock in the servants' hall strikes 2, tea time feels especially welcome after the quiet precision of arranging the flowers. The teapot sits in its usual place, a small plate of buttered bread beside it. Mary sips her tea slowly, her hands warming around the cup, the faint scent of the delphiniums still lingering on her fingers. The afternoon passes with steady work, dusting the bookshelves in the library, polishing the brass handles in the main hall, and sweeping the steps outside the servants' entrance. Now and then, she catches a glimpse of the blue flowers upstairs when she passes by, the colour bright even in the dim hallway light. By evening, the lamps are lit, the table is set, and the family dines upstairs. The faint hum of conversation drifts down, and somewhere above, the scent of those rare flowers still lingers in the air. When Mary climbs to her attic room, she unties her apron and folds it neatly. She pauses at her window, the rooftops quiet under the moonlight, thinking for a moment of the small difference those flowers made to the day. A rare request, but one that left a little colour behind in her memory. The morning begins bright and clear, the sunlight spilling across Mary's attic room in golden lines. It touches the edges of the quilt, the polished wood of the chair, and the small mirror where the light seems to linger. The air is fresh, carrying the faint scent of the garden below, and from somewhere distant comes the rhythmic clip of hooves on dry cobblestones. Mary dresses, as she always does, button, smooth, tie, pin, and descends the attic stairs, her hand resting on the smooth curve of the banister. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is preparing breakfast, the smell of fresh rolls baking in the oven filling the room. A bowl of peeled apples sits on the table, ready to be stewed for the midday meal. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says warmly, and Mary returns the greeting with a soft smile. Her first task is in the mistress's chambers, drawing back the curtains to let in the bright light. She smooths the bedspread, dusts the dressing table, and arranges a vase of fresh daisies near the window, their pale petals almost glowing in the sunshine. By late morning, the warmth outside has grown, and the air inside carries a faint hum of distant activity from the street. Mary is in the hallway, polishing the stair rail until it gleams, when she notices the first faint change. The light through the window shifts, turning softer, less golden. Somewhere beyond the glass, the wind stirs the leaves in the garden. The hall clock chimes 2 and tea time begins as always. Mary pours her tea, the steam curling upward, but even as she lifts her cup, she hears the first soft patter of rain against the window. It grows quickly, the drops tapping faster, until the sound becomes a steady rhythm filling the room. The afternoon work changes to suit the weather. The rugs that were to be beaten in the yard are left inside, rolled neatly against the wall. Instead, Mary polishes the brass candlesticks in the parlour, their surfaces catching the muted light that filters through the rain-washed glass. In the kitchen, the apples are simmering now, filling the room with a warm, sweet scent that blends with the faint freshness drifting in through the cracked back door. By early evening, the rain has eased to a mist, the garden outside glistening with tiny droplets. The lamps are lit, their glow making the rooms feel even warmer against the damp evening air. Upstairs, the family dines, their voices low and even, while in the kitchen, the last of the rolls cool on the counter. When Mary climbs to her attic room, the rooftops outside are slick and dark, the sky a pale grey fading into night. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and lies down, the soft memory of the rain's rhythm still in her ears as the house settles into quiet. The morning light comes filtered through a pale haze, filling Mary's attic room with a muted glow. It brushes over the folded apron on the chair and glances faintly off the rim of the small water jug on the dresser. The air carries a faint tang, not unpleasant but sharper than usual, drifting up from the kitchen where the first embers have already been stirred. Mary dresses, the quiet rhythm of button, smooth, tie and pin settling over her. She steps onto the attic stairs, the polished banister warm beneath her hand, and makes her way down into the heart of the house. The kitchen is already alive with soft movement. Mrs. Porter is slicing bread at the table, the steady scrape of the knife mingling with the hiss of the kettle. Near the back door, a tall, wiry man stands removing his cap, the chimney sweep, with his brushes bundled neatly beside him. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says as she sprinkles flour over a dough board. Mary nods, returning the greeting, while the sweep gives her a polite tip of his cap. Her first task is to light the fire in the mistress's sitting room before the sweep begins his work elsewhere. The air is cool, and she works quickly, coaxing the flames until they burn steadily. Through the window, she can see the sweep's small cart in the lane, its wheels resting on the cobblestones. By mid-morning, the house carries the sound of the sweep's work, the soft, rhythmic scrape of brushes moving through brick flues, the faint rattle of loosened soot falling. A dry, dusty smell begins to drift into the hallways, mixing with the warmer scent of baking bread from the kitchen. The hall clock strikes 2, and tea time arrives as always. Mary pours her tea, the steam curling upward into the air faintly scented with coal dust. Beside her, a small slice of seed cake rests on a plate, its sweetness cutting gently through the sharper smell lingering from the chimneys. The afternoon passes with quieter tasks, wiping the narrow windowsills in the back corridor, folding a stack of napkins in the pantry, and helping Anna carry a clean rug into the library once the chimney there has been cleared. The sweep works steadily, his footsteps soft, his tools neatly set aside when each room is finished. By evening, the house feels subtly different. The fires burn more freely, their flames bright and clear after the day's work. The family dines upstairs, and the warm scent of roasted meat and fresh bread drifts through the air, untroubled now by the earlier tang of soot. When Mary climbs to her attic room, she pauses by the window. The rooftops are dark against the deepening sky, a thin wisp of chimney smoke curling upward in the still night air. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and lies down, the quiet of the house settling around her once more. The morning light comes in clear and bright, falling in soft rectangles across Mary's attic floor. It touches the edge of her quilt and glows faintly on the surface of the small mirror near the wall. From the street below comes the steady roll of carriage wheels, mingled with the low calls of a milkman making his rounds. Mary dresses with her usual rhythm, fastening each button, smoothing her skirt, tying her apron, and pinning her hair into place. The attic stairs creak softly beneath her, and the polished banister slides cool and smooth under her hand. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is not alone. Anna is standing by the table, reading from a folded note written in the mistress's delicate hand. "Morning, Mary," Mrs. Porter says, a faint smile in her voice. "The mistress wants a special pudding for tonight, treacle sponge. She's asked that you help me with it." It is not common for Mary to spend the morning in the kitchen, but she nods without hesitation. Her usual first task, lighting the library fire, will be tended to later. Instead, she washes her hands, ties the ties of a second apron over the first, and begins helping to measure out flour and sugar. The air fills quickly with the warm scent of golden syrup, rich and sweet, as it is poured slowly into a large mixing bowl. Mary beats eggs with a steady hand, the fork making a quiet, rhythmic scrape against the side of the dish. Mrs. Porter folds the mixture together, the pale batter thickening with each turn of the spoon. By mid-morning the pudding basin is ready, its surface covered and tied with string. It is set into the steamer, where it will sit for hours, the sound of gently bubbling water filling the kitchen with a soft hiss. The warmth from the range makes the room especially comfortable, the kind of warmth that seems to seep into the skin. When the hall clock strikes 2, tea time is taken at the kitchen table. The teapot steams quietly, and beside it sits a plate of leftover shortbread from the day before. Mary sips her tea, the sweet smell of the treacle sponge still drifting through the room. The afternoon is quieter, polishing the brass doorknobs, dusting the mantel in the drawing room, folding a stack of towels for the linen cupboard. But now and again she passes through the kitchen to check the steamer, its lid rattling gently as the pudding cooks. By early evening the pudding is lifted out, its soft golden surface glistening as it is turned onto a plate. The sweet scent fills the air, richer now than it was in the morning. Upstairs, the dining table gleams under the light of the lamps, ready for the family's supper. When Mary climbs to her attic room, she feels the pleasant tiredness that comes from a day well spent on something slightly different. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and lies down with the faint, sweet scent of treacle still clinging to her hands. The morning light reaches Mary's attic room in a soft, pale wash, spreading across the quilt and the smooth wood of the floor. The air feels mild, carrying with it the faint scent of the garden below, damp earth and the last traces of dew. From the street outside comes the low rumble of carriage wheels, slower than the usual morning pace. Mary dresses in her steady rhythm, fastening each button, smoothing her skirt, tying her apron, pinning her hair, before stepping onto the attic stairs. The wood creaks gently beneath her, and the polished banister slides cool under her hand. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is stirring porridge, the steam rising steadily from the pot. "Morning, Mary," she says with her usual calm tone. But before Mary can answer, the sharp ring of the front doorbell echoes through the house. It is unusual for a caller to arrive so early. Mary pauses, listening as Anna's footsteps move quickly across the front hall. A low murmur of voices follows, then the sound of the door closing again. "Unexpected visitor," Mrs. Porter says quietly, glancing toward the hallway. "Best keep the tea service polished. I think they'll be staying for a while." Mary begins her first task in the drawing room. She dusts the mantel, polishes the small brass clock, and straightens the chairs so their backs are perfectly aligned. Through the window, she catches a glimpse of the visitor's carriage in the lane, a deep green body with shining brass fittings, its wheels still damp from the morning's mist. By mid-morning, the air in the house feels subtly different. Voices drift from the upstairs sitting room, the visitor's lighter tone mingling with the mistress's measured speech. Mary carries a small tray of biscuits up to Anna, the china cups on the tea service gleaming from her earlier work. The hall clock strikes 2, and tea time in the servants' hall is quiet but pleasant. The teapot steams gently in the middle of the table, beside a plate of oat biscuits. Mary sips her tea slowly, knowing the afternoon will bring extra polishing and preparation before the evening meal. The rest of the day moves at a steady pace, dusting the staircase spindles, folding a fresh stack of linen napkins, checking that each guest room lamp is filled with oil. Now and then she hears the visitor's voice upstairs, smooth and warm, as the rain begins to patter lightly against the windows. By the time the lamps are lit, the dining table is set with a little more care than usual, the silver gleaming, the crystal glasses placed so the candlelight catches and dances in them. Upstairs, the low hum of conversation is joined by the faint clink of cutlery. When Mary climbs to her attic room, the carriage is gone from the lane, but the memory of the day's small disruption lingers. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and settles into bed, the hush of the house wrapping around her once more. The morning light comes in bright and clear, falling across Mary's attic floor in long, warm lines. It glows on the folded apron resting on the chair and catches the small gleam of the brass hairpins laid neatly beside the mirror. From below comes the faint, rhythmic thump of footsteps, heavier than usual, and a low murmur of men's voices. Mary dresses quickly, tying her apron and pinning her hair into place before stepping onto the attic stairs. The banister is warm under her hand, the wood smooth from years of use. As she reaches the kitchen, the sound of movement is clearer, the scrape of something heavy being shifted, the creak of the front door hinges. Mrs. Porter is by the range, but her attention is half on the doorway. "Morning, Mary," she says, nodding toward the hall. "They're bringing in a new sideboard for the dining room today. Best keep clear of the front while they carry it through." Mary nods and begins her first task in the drawing room instead, dusting the mantel and polishing the brass clock until it catches the sunlight from the half-drawn curtains. Through the open door, she catches glimpses of two delivery men maneuvering a tall piece of polished oak furniture up the front steps. The air carries the scent of fresh-cut wood, sharp and clean, mingling with the faint sweetness of beeswax polish. By mid-morning, the new sideboard is in place against the far wall of the dining room. Its smooth surface gleams, and Mary is asked to give it a gentle wipe with a dry cloth, removing the fine dust left from its journey. The grain of the wood feels rich under her fingertips, and the faint smell of varnish rises as she works. The hall clock chimes 2, and tea time offers a moment of calm after the small flurry of activity. The teapot rests in the centre of the table, steam curling gently upward. Mary takes a seat, sipping her tea, while the distant sound of hammering fades from the street outside. The afternoon's tasks include rearranging the silver and linens in the new sideboard, making sure each drawer is lined and each shelf holds its proper contents. It is slow, careful work, the kind that feels satisfying in its order. The kitchen smells of baking by the time she is finished, a savoury pie cooling on the windowsill. As the lamps are lit, the new piece seems to settle into its place as though it had always been there. The dining table is set, the silver gleaming both on the table and within the new cabinet. When Mary climbs to her attic that night, she pauses to look once more toward the dining room as she passes. The polished wood catches the lamplight in a soft golden sheen. She unties her apron, folds it neatly, and rests in the quiet satisfaction of a day when something new found its place in the familiar rhythm. The morning begins softly, the light falling in pale bands across Mary's attic room. It lingers on the chair where her apron rests and glows faintly on the small mirror by the wall. From outside comes the light clip of footsteps on the cobblestones, followed by the low creak of the front gate opening and closing again. Mary dresses with her usual steady rhythm, fastening each button, smoothing her skirt, tying her apron, pinning her hair. The attic stairs greet her with their soft creak, the polished banister sliding under her hand as she descends. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is standing with a folded piece of paper in her hand, her brow raised in quiet curiosity. On the table lies an envelope, cream-coloured, its edges neatly pressed, with a postmark from a town far to the north. "Morning, Mary," she says, before setting the letter carefully beside the teapot. "This came for the mistress. Anna's just taken it up." Mary begins her first task in the drawing room, dusting the mantel and the legs of the polished chairs. The air is cool and faintly scented with the fresh flowers in the vase, yellow primroses that catch the light from the window. Through the open door, she hears the faint tread of Anna's steps upstairs, and then a pause, as if the mistress is reading. By mid-morning there is a change in the rhythm of the house. The usual soft murmur of voices upstairs is joined by longer silences, then the sound of drawers opening and closing, Anna passes Mary in the hallway, carrying a folded shawl over her arm, her expression thoughtful. When the clock in the servants' hall strikes 2, tea time feels like a quiet pause in the middle of a day that has shifted ever so slightly. The teapot sits steaming in the centre of the table, and beside it rests a plate of currant buns. Mary sips her tea slowly, the warmth spreading through her hands, while outside a faint breeze moves through the garden. The afternoon brings its usual work, polishing the silver in the pantry, sweeping the back steps, and folding a fresh stack of towels. But now and then, Mary catches the soft click of a latch upstairs, or the faint sound of paper being folded, as if the mistress is preparing a reply to the letter. By evening, the table is set and the lamps are lit, their golden glow filling the dining room. The family's voices at supper are quiet, each word measured, and there is a feeling in the air, not sad exactly, but touched with a faraway thought. When Mary climbs to her attic room, she unties her apron and folds it neatly on the chair. Through her window, the rooftops rest under a sky brushed with the last light of the day. Somewhere in the quiet below, the letter still lies on the mistress's desk, its neat script holding whatever news had travelled so far to reach them. The morning begins with a soft, pearly light filtering through Mary's attic window. It rests on the wooden floorboards, cool and smooth under her bare feet, and touches the folded apron waiting on the chair. Somewhere below, the muffled sound of voices drifts upward, mingled with the faint clink of crockery. Mary dresses with her usual steady care, buttoning her bodice, smoothing her skirt, tying her apron snug at the waist. The attic stairs creak softly as she descends, the banister warm beneath her hand. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter stands at the range with 3 pans going at once. The air is thick with the warm, comforting scents of baking bread, simmering broth, and sweet pastry cooling on the windowsill. Anna enters carrying a folded list from the mistress, her voice low but brisk as she reads it aloud. There'll be 6 guests this evening. The good silver is to be set, and the drawing-room fire lit early. Mary begins her morning in the dining room, dusting the chairs and giving the new sideboard an extra polish so the wood gleams under the lamps later. The linen cloth is smoothed across the table, its surface crisp and white, each crease pressed flat by careful hands. She counts out the silver forks and spoons, placing them with exact precision beside each setting. By mid-morning, the drawing-room has the glow of early preparation, the fire laid, a fresh vase of flowers on the mantel, and the curtains drawn just enough to soften the sunlight. The faint scent of beeswax polish drifts in the air, mingling with the sharp, clean note of freshly cut blooms. When the clock in the servants' hall chimes 2, tea time feels like a brief pause before the final stretch of work. The teapot steams gently in the middle of the table, beside a plate of buttered scones. Mary sips her tea slowly, listening to the distant murmur of the mistress speaking with Anna about seating arrangements. The afternoon brings a quiet kind of bustle. Upstairs, lamps are filled and trimmed, their glass chimneys polished until they shine. In the dining room, the silver candlesticks are placed down the length of the table, their bases catching the light. Mary folds napkins into neat triangles, each one identical to the last, and places them in perfect alignment. As evening draws near, the kitchen grows warmer, the scent of roasting meat filling the air. Plates are warmed, serving dishes set out, and gravy boats polished to a mirror finish. Upstairs, the drawing-room fire crackles softly, its warmth reaching into the corners of the room. When the first guests arrive, their coats are taken, and their voices float through the house, polite greetings mingling with the sound of footsteps on polished floors. Mary remains in her quiet place, ready to carry trays, pour wine, and ensure the evening flows without pause. By the time the lamps are turned low and the last carriage wheels fade into the night, the table is cleared and the silver returned to its cabinet. Mary climbs the attic stairs, her steps softened by the thick runner underfoot. In her small room, she pauses by the window, looking out at the rooftops glistening faintly in the moonlight. The air from the slightly open pane is cool, carrying the faint scent of the garden's damp earth. She closes the shutters gently, sits on the edge of her bed, and lets the calm weight of the day sink into her bones. The morning begins with a muted grey light spilling through Mary's attic window. Raindrops patter steadily against the glass, leaving soft trails that distort the view of the rooftops beyond. Somewhere below, The steady drip of water from the eaves adds its own rhythm to the quiet house. Mary dresses with her usual care, fastening each button and tying her apron while listening to the muffled hush that rain brings. The attic stairs creak under her feet, and the scent of damp stone rises faintly from the walls. In the kitchen, the air is warm and bright, a welcome contrast to the grey outdoors. Mrs. Porter stands by the range, steam rising from a pot of porridge, while Anna shakes the rain from her shawl after returning from the market. A small puddle forms on the slate floor, quickly mopped away. Mary begins her morning work in the drawing room, dusting the mantel and straightening the chairs while the rain taps against the tall windows. The air is cooler here, faintly scented with the fresh flowers brought in the day before. She lights the fire early, the flames catching quickly and sending a soft warmth through the room. By mid-morning, the rain is heavier, drumming gently on the roof and trickling down the gutters. Mary polishes the brass door handles, the warm gleam bright against the dim light from the windows. The sound of the weather outside seems to make each task slower, more deliberate, as though the whole house has settled into a quieter rhythm. When the clock in the servants' hall strikes 2, tea time feels especially comforting. Steam curls from the teapot, and the soft crumble of oat biscuits fills the small space with a homely scent. Mary takes a slow sip, the warmth spreading through her hands as she listens to the soft hiss of rain on the kitchen windowsill. The afternoon brings indoor tasks, folding linens in the pantry, polishing the silver, and checking that the lamps are trimmed for the early dark. Outside, the street is slick with rain, the passing carriages leaving ripples in the puddles. By the time evening arrives, the lamps glow golden against the gloom, and the house feels wrapped in its own cocoon of warmth. The fire in the drawing room crackles steadily, the air scented with wood smoke and the faint sweetness of baking from the kitchen. When Mary climbs to her attic that night, she pauses at the window. Raindrops still trace paths down the glass, and the rooftops glisten faintly in the lamplight. She sits at the small table by the window for a moment, listening to the softened sounds of the street below, before finally turning in, the rain a gentle lullaby above her. The morning begins with a pale wash of light across Mary's attic window, the faint chatter of sparrows drifting in from the eaves. From below, the kitchen clock ticks in steady rhythm, and the air holds the faint scent of baking bread. Mary dresses as usual, smoothing her skirt and tying her apron, but today a folded shopping list waits for her on the kitchen table. Mrs. Porter, hands dusted with flour, nods toward it. The mistress would like these fetched from the market. Best go before the day grows too warm. Stepping out through the side door, Mary feels the cobblestones firm beneath her boots. The air is fresh, tinged with the scent of damp earth from the night's light rain. Along the street, the shutters on shop fronts are lifting, and the sound of wagon wheels hums in the distance. The market square is already lively when she arrives. Stalls of bright vegetables catch the light, carrots bunched with green tops, glossy red apples, the pale sheen of cabbages stacked in neat pyramids. The scent of fresh herbs drifts from one corner, mingling with the yeasty warmth from a baker's cart. Mary greets the vendors she knows by sight, exchanging coins for a parcel of butter wrapped in waxed paper and a small basket of early strawberries. Her fingers catch the faint texture of the wicker handles, still cool from the morning air. She pauses at the fishmonger's stall, where silver-scaled mackerel glisten in neat rows, and makes her careful choice. By late morning, her basket is filled, and she begins the walk back. The streets feel warmer now, the air scented with coal smoke from nearby chimneys. Children dart between the passers-by, their laughter briefly breaking the low hum of conversation and clatter of hooves. Back at the house, the kitchen feels welcoming after the briskness outdoors. Mary sets the basket on the table, each item lifted out and placed where it belongs. Strawberries into a blue-glazed bowl, butter into the cool pantry, fish laid on a tray with a sprinkle of salt. Tea time comes quietly, the steam from the pot curling in the warm air. Outside, the market will be winding down, but inside the house, the steady rhythm of the day resumes as though it had never been interrupted. By evening, the strawberries are served in cut glass bowls, their sweetness bright against the creamy white of the custard poured over them. Mary watches from the doorway as the family enjoys the dessert, the quiet satisfaction of her morning's errand settling warmly in her thoughts. The morning begins with pale light slipping through the high attic window, the faint sound of water being drawn from the pump below. Mary rises quietly, the floorboards cool beneath her feet, and dresses in her working clothes, a simpler skirt and an older apron already softened from many washings. Downstairs, the scullery smells faintly of soap and damp cloth. A large copper pot sits ready, its surface catching the light from the small window. Mrs. Porter is already at the range, coaxing the fire to life beneath the copper, while Anna carries in baskets of linens from the laundry room. The day's work begins with sorting, the heavier towels and sheets in one pile, the fine table linens and collars in another. Mary runs her fingers over the smooth weave of the sheets, then over the delicate stitching on a handkerchief. Each will have its turn in the warm, soapy water. Soon the copper is steaming gently, and the first load is lowered in. The soap scent blooms in the air, clean, sharp, and almost sweet. Mary takes the wooden paddle and stirs slowly, the wet fabric swirling beneath the surface. Now and then, steam drifts up to her face, softening the chill of the morning. By mid-morning, the laundry lines in the small yard begin to fill. White sheets ripple gently in the breeze, their edges lifting with each passing gust. Mary pins them in neat, even rows, stepping carefully between the puddles left by the early dew. When the clock in the servants' hall strikes 2, tea time feels like a welcome pause. The teapot steams on the kitchen table, beside a plate of oat biscuits still warm from the oven. The faint flap of the drying linens outside reaches through the open door, mingling with the low hum of voices in the servants' hall. The afternoon is for the finer work. The careful rinsing and wringing of tablecloths, the starching of collars, the gentle smoothing of damp cloth with an iron heated on the range. Mary works slowly, the hiss of the iron a steady soothing sound in the warm room. By evening the baskets are filled again, this time with fresh, clean linens. The scent of soap still clings faintly to the fabric as each piece is folded and placed neatly in the cupboard. When Mary climbs the attic stairs that night, her arms are pleasantly tired from the day's work. In her small room, she pauses a moment, noticing the faint scent of soap still lingering on her hands. She sits on the bed, letting the quiet press in around her, while below, the house settles into its nighttime hush. The morning begins in its usual way, pale light in the attic, the steady sound of footsteps in the servants' hall below, the scent of baking bread drifting upward. Mary dresses with quiet care, smoothing the front of her apron before descending the narrow staircase. In the kitchen, Mrs. Porter is busy at the range, while Anna is polishing the hallway floor. The air hums with the small sounds of the house waking, a door opening in the distance, the faint rustle of newspapers upstairs. But before the morning is far along, the sound of carriage wheels approaches on the street outside. They slow, stop, and the sharp tap of the driver's whip signals his halt. Through the front windows, the shape of a gentleman in a long coat can be seen, his collar turned up against the cool air. Anna hurries to answer the door, her expression politely composed. The visitor speaks briefly, his voice low, his words indistinct, before stepping inside and removing his hat. The mistress comes forward from the drawing room, her surprise hidden under the smooth welcome of her greeting. Mary, working in the dining room, listens as the voices drift down the hallway. There is a new tone to the house now, not hurried but alert, as small adjustments are made. An extra place is to be laid for luncheon. A fresh vase of flowers is brought into the sitting room. The fire is lit earlier than planned. The visitor's boots click softly across the floorboards as he moves from room to room with the master, their voices rising and falling in measured conversation. Mary keeps to the background, appearing when needed, carrying a tray of tea to the drawing room, pouring without a sound, then withdrawing again. By mid-afternoon, the sky outside begins to soften into grey, the first signs of an early dusk. The visitor remains, seated comfortably in the chair near the hearth, his coat draped neatly over the back. The tea things are replaced by a small decanter of sherry, the low clink of glasses adding a gentle note to the quiet. When evening finally comes, the visitor's carriage returns, its wheels splashing lightly through the damp street. Coats are handed back, farewells exchanged, and the door closes with a quiet click. The house exhales into its usual rhythm once more. In the servants' hall, the soft clatter of cleared dishes fades as Mary begins her climb to the attic. This time she pauses at the top of the stairs, glancing back toward the dim glow from below, and thinks of how quickly the day can change, yet still end in the same gentle stillness. The morning begins with a cool brightness spilling into the servants' hall, the pale sun just touching the tops of the street's chimneys. On the kitchen table lies a folded sheet of paper, Mrs. Porter's list of the day's tasks written in her careful hand. It is longer than usual, for this is the day set aside for the deeper cleaning that keeps the house in its quiet, ordered beauty. Mary starts in the drawing room, where the long curtains are drawn back and the dust motes drift lazily in the sunlight. She polishes the brass curtain rails until they gleam, then kneels to clean each carved leg of the armchairs. Her cloth moves in slow, steady circles, the faint scent of beeswax rising with each motion. Upstairs, Anna tends to the master's study, removing each book from the shelves and wiping the spines before returning them to their neat rows. The room smells faintly of leather and old paper, the scent deepening as the shelves are polished. By mid-morning, the air in the house is filled with a medley of clean scents: lavender oil for the wood, fresh soap for the floors, and the faint tang of vinegar used on the glass. Mary opens the tall windows for a short while, letting in a cool drift of fresh air. From outside comes the faint sound of a cart passing, its wheels bumping over the cobblestones. The carpets are swept slowly, each pass of the broom deliberate, the soft swish blending with the distant ticking of the hallway clock. Silver candlesticks are polished until they catch the light like small flames. The mirrors, when wiped, seem to draw more brightness into the rooms. When the clock strikes 2, tea time feels especially welcome. The servants gather for a short rest, the teapot set at the centre of the table, steam curling into the warm air. Outside, a sparrow hops along the windowsill, pecking at something unseen. The afternoon is for the final touches, pressing the table linens so they fall in perfect folds, dusting the fine china in the cabinet, arranging fresh flowers in the vases. The house begins to take on a quiet glow, each surface catching the softened light of the late day. By evening, every room feels calm and renewed. The faint fragrance of lavender still lingers in the air as the lamps are lit, their golden glow settling over polished wood and neatly set tables. When Mary climbs to her attic room that night, she notices how the clean scent clings faintly to her hands and clothes. She sets her candle on the bedside table, the small flame flickering gently, and lets her eyes rest on the stillness that comes after a day so carefully tended. The evening begins differently. Instead of the usual sound of carriage wheels arriving, tonight they are heard departing, fading into the distance until the street falls silent again. The family has gone out for a dinner engagement, leaving the house in the care of its servants. Mary stands in the hallway for a moment after the door is closed, listening to the sudden hush. The great rooms upstairs sit dark and still, their lamps unlit, their fires resting in cold grates. The absence of the usual footsteps and voices gives the air a kind of softness, as though the house has taken a long breath and decided to hold it. In the kitchen, the mood is easier than usual. The range still glows, but the work is lighter. No formal supper to prepare, no table to set. Anna sits at the long table, darning a small tear in one of the master's gloves. Mrs. Porter pours tea into plain mugs instead of fine china, the sound of the liquid splashing gently in the quiet. Mary allows herself the small pleasure of lingering over her own tea, feeling the warmth spread through her hands as she wraps them around the cup. The conversation is soft, meandering, touching on small matters: the weather, a new shop opening near the market, a recipe someone heard of but hasn't tried. Later, the servants go about light tasks at an unhurried pace, checking that the lamps in the entry hall are topped with oil, making sure the fires are safe to leave. Mary takes a moment in the drawing room, smoothing the cushions and straightening a book on the side table, though she knows no one will be here tonight. The stillness of the house becomes almost companionable. From the back garden, the sound of wind in the ivy drifts in through a slightly open window. The smell of the kitchen's banked fire mingles with the faint scent of lavender polish that lingers from the previous day's work. When the family's carriage is expected to return, the servants take their positions quietly, ready to open the door and resume the usual rhythm. But for a little while longer, the quiet belongs to them, a rare pocket of calm within the steady turn of the household's days. When Mary climbs to her attic that night, The hush of the evening still seems to cling to her thoughts. The great house below her feels as though it has tucked itself in, and she drifts into sleep with that same sense of peaceful rest. The morning begins in darkness, the sky outside still heavy with night when the first bell rings. Mary rises from her bed in the attic, the air cool enough that her breath clouds faintly in front of her. She dresses quickly, pulling on her thickest stockings and fastening her shawl close before lighting her candle. The windows along the stairwell are edged with frost, their glass laced in delicate patterns like fine lacework. In the kitchen, the range has been banked overnight, and Mrs. Porter is already coaxing the fire back into life. The air is cold enough to make the copper kettle steam as soon as it is set on the hob. Mary's first task is to carry coal from the scuttle to the fireplaces. The weight is familiar, the black dust cool against her hands, the sound of the pieces clinking together filling the quiet. She works methodically, laying fresh fires in the sitting room and drawing room, her fingers stiffening in the chill until the flames catch and warmth begins to spread. By mid-morning, the light outside is pale and thin, filtered through low clouds. Frost still clings to the garden paths, crunching faintly under the boots of the errand boy who brings in the day's post. The air in the kitchen is warmer now, carrying the scent of bread rising near the fire. The household's winter rhythm is slower but heavier in its labours, polishing boots damp from the street, beating the snow from cloaks, keeping the fires steady against the deepening cold. Mary feels the warmth of the hearth at her back as she peels potatoes for the midday meal, the knife moving in smooth, practiced strokes. Tea time is especially welcome on a winter's day. The mugs are warm to the touch, the tea rich with the faint spice of cloves. Outside, a few snowflakes drift lazily past the window, settling on the dark branches of the plane trees before vanishing into the air. As afternoon fades, the sky turns quickly toward dusk, the lamps lit earlier than in other seasons. The firelight flickers against polished wood and brass, making the rooms feel close and comforting. By the time Mary climbs the attic stairs, the cold has returned to the hallway corners, and the air is sharp against her face. She slips into bed quickly, drawing the blankets close, and listens to the muffled crackle of the last fire in the kitchen below, its warmth slowly fading as the house drifts into its winter sleep. The morning begins with sunlight spilling more freely through the attic window, bright and pale gold. Mary wakes to the sound of the front windows being unlatched in the rooms below. The first time in months the house will be aired from end to end. In the kitchen, the air is already different. Instead of the deep scent of the winter fires, it carries a faint freshness from the garden, cool and green. On the table, Mrs. Porter's list is longer than usual, written in firm strokes. Curtains down, rugs beaten, cupboards washed, silver checked. Mary begins in the dining room, unhooking the heavy curtains with careful hands. The fabric is taken straight to the yard, where Anna shakes them wide, the dust drifting away in the sunlight. Nearby, rugs are being beaten, each thud sending up a soft cloud that drifts away on the breeze. Upstairs, the bedroom windows are thrown open. The air is brisk, carrying the faint sweetness of early blossoms. Mary wipes each sill clean, feeling the cool wood under her cloth, and notes the sunlight pooling across the polished floorboards. By late morning, the glass-fronted cabinets have been emptied. Each plate and cup is washed and dried until it gleams, the china warm in her hands from the drying cloth. The shelves, once bare, are wiped and freshened with lavender-scented paper before the pieces are returned to their places. Tea time is taken outdoors today, at the edge of the back step. The mugs of tea are warm in the hands, steam rising into the crisp air, while sparrows chatter in the hedges. It feels almost like a small celebration, the first workday of the year when the sun feels high and friendly. The afternoon is filled with lighter scents, beeswax for the wood, fresh soap for the floors, a bowl of early tulips placed in the hallway. Windows are polished until the garden outside seems almost part of the room. The air flows through each space, stirring curtains and carrying away the closed-in feeling of winter. By evening, the house feels both cleaner and somehow lighter. The curtains, newly brushed, sway faintly in the soft evening air, drifting through the still open windows. When Mary climbs the attic stairs, the scents of the day still linger, fresh air, wood polish, and the faintest trace of flowers. It feels as though the whole house has drawn a fresh, deep breath. It was still early when Mary opened her eyes, the pale spring light brushing across the slanted ceiling of her attic room. She lay there a little longer than usual, listening to the familiar murmurs of the street below, a milk cart rattling past, the slow clip of a single horse in the distance. But there was no bell calling her down to the servants' hall, no clatter of trays or scurry of feet. The quiet was different today, softer, because it was her day off. The knowledge settled around her like an extra blanket, warm and welcome. She rose unhurriedly, taking her time to dress, choosing her second-best dress, plain but neat, and pinning her hair back without haste. In the kitchen, the air was warm from the banked fire, and Mrs. Porter greeted her with a nod and a pot of tea already set out. There was no list of tasks waiting, only a plate with 2 thick slices of buttered bread and a little dish of jam. Mary took her tea to the bench just outside the back door, sitting in the gentle sunlight that filtered across the cobblestones. The garden beyond was still waking, sparrows flicked in and out of the ivy, and the scent of damp earth rose from the flower beds. For a moment, she did nothing at all but watch the way the light fell over the yard, feeling the rare luxury of not being needed anywhere. By mid-morning, she had set out into the streets, her small coin purse tucked into her pocket. The air was mild, and a faint breeze carried the scents of fresh bread from the bakery and oranges from the market stalls. The shopkeepers greeted her as she passed, some with quick nods, others with a word or two, and she paused at a bookstall, running her fingers over the neat rows of second-hand volumes, their leather spines warm in the sun. She bought nothing just yet, preferring to wander first, to enjoy the sense of time stretching ahead of her without urgency. When noon approached, Mary stepped into a small tea room tucked along a quieter lane. The windows were open just enough to let the sound of the street drift in, the gentle clop of hooves, the occasional laugh from a passer-by. She ordered a pot of strong tea and a slice of currant cake, and lingered over them both, watching the world move by at its steady pace. There was no need to hurry back, no clock to race against. She could sit as long as she liked, her thoughts wandering as freely as the breeze through the open window. In the afternoon, she returned to the market and bought a sprig of lavender from a flower seller, tucking it carefully into her basket beside a small paper parcel from the bookstall, a worn but well-kept volume she had decided to take home after all. The walk back to the house was slow, her steps unpressured, and she noticed details she often missed: the chipped blue paint on a shutter, the way the sunlight struck the ironwork on a balcony, the laughter of 2 children chasing each other along the edge of the pavement. When she reached her room again, the house was quiet, the family out for the afternoon, and the servants busy with their own work. She placed the lavender in a small jar by her bed, opened her new book, and settled into the worn chair by the window. Outside, the sky softened toward evening, but she read on until the shadows stretched long across the floor. Only then did she light her small lamp, the gentle glow falling across the pages, and let the peace of the day fill her entirely. It would be back to the usual rhythm tomorrow, but for now the hours still belonged to her. The day began with a soft grey light filtering through the attic window, the sort of light that made everything appear gentle at the edges. Mary rose slowly, listening to the faint patter of leaves being swept along the street by the early wind. The air held a new chill, not yet winter's bite, but the unmistakable coolness that comes when autumn has fully settled in. She dressed warmly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and fastening her boots securely. There was no great hurry today. The family had given her the morning to fetch certain items from the market, but she knew the hours would pass easily among the stalls, and she looked forward to it. The streets were still damp from a light overnight rain, the cobblestones dark and glossy. As she walked, her breath curled faintly in front of her, and the smells of the season rose to meet her: roasting chestnuts from a small cart, the earthy scent of fallen leaves caught in the gutters, the tang of coal smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Shop windows displayed heavier fabrics now, deep wools and thick tweeds in rich colours, while the grocers' barrels brimmed with apples, pears and late plums. Mary walked at an even pace, taking it all in, her basket swinging lightly from one arm. When she reached the market square, the air was alive with quiet energy. The canvas awnings of the stalls billowed faintly in the wind, their edges spotted with raindrops from earlier that morning. The The ground beneath was strewn with straw to keep it from becoming too muddy, and it gave off a faint, dry scent that mingled with the sharper smells of fresh herbs, baked bread, and the faint saltiness from the fishmonger's table. Mary paused at the greengrocer's stall first, her hands brushing over bunches of carrots still dusted with soil, firm heads of cabbage, and a heap of golden quinces whose perfume seemed to hang in the cool air. She chose carefully, letting the weight settle in her basket bit by bit. The cheesemonger's stall was next, its shelves stacked with wheels and wedges in varying shades of cream and gold. The man behind the counter wrapped her purchase in thick paper, tying it neatly with string while telling her of a new shipment that had come in from the countryside. She listened, nodding politely, though her attention was half on the movement of the market, the slow sway of the crowd, the low murmur of conversations, the steady rhythm of coins changing hands. There was something comforting in the way it all moved together, a pattern she had seen each season but which never felt quite the same. By late morning, the light had shifted. The clouds were breaking just enough for pale sun to glance off the rooftops, and the leaves along the market edge shivered and danced with each passing gust. Mary stopped at a small bakery stall for a loaf still warm from the oven, its crust dusted with flour, the heat seeping gently through the paper as she held it. She took a moment to stand aside, watching as a group of children in scarves chased each other through the open space between stalls, their laughter rising into the cool air. It reminded her of the markets from her own childhood, smaller but full of the same mingling scents and sounds. The walk back to the house was slower, not because of the weight in her basket, but because she found herself lingering over the quiet details. The way the ivy clung to the brick walls in shades of rust and green, the faint tapping of raindrops shaken from the trees overhead, the deep toll of a church bell somewhere beyond the next street. By the time she reached the servants' entrance, the kitchen fire was already burning bright, and she stepped inside to the familiar warmth, setting her basket on the table. As she unpacked each item, the scents of the market seemed to follow her in: bread, apples, herbs, and the faint sharpness of the autumn air. It was a simple errand, but one that left the day feeling fuller, richer, as though the season itself had walked home with her. The storm arrived in the late afternoon, rolling in from the west with a slow but steady darkness that deepened by the minute. By the time the first rumble of thunder reached the house, the lamps were already lit in the hallways, their golden light reflecting softly on the polished banisters. Mary had been finishing her work in the drawing room when the wind began to rise, rattling the window panes and tugging faintly at the curtains. She paused to look out into the street where the leaves were swirling in sudden urgent patterns and the lamplighter was hurrying from post to post, his coat pulled tight against the gusts. There was something oddly comforting about being inside on such a night, the knowledge that the work of the day was mostly done and the house was ready to hold steady against whatever might come. In the kitchen, the fire was brighter than usual, its heat pressing outward into the room as the wind whistled faintly through the chimney. Mrs. Porter moved with her usual precision, but there was a subtle shift in her manner, a quicker movement to check the larder door was latched, a heavier log added to the fire. Anna returned from her round of the shutters, with her cheeks pink from the cold damp, shaking a few stray raindrops from her hair. Mary set the kettle on to boil, the steam soon curling up into the warm air as the rain began in earnest, tapping steadily against the windows before swelling into a heavier drumbeat. They took their tea together in the servants' hall, the sound of the storm softened by the thick walls around them. Conversation came and went in low tones, and now and then someone would glance toward the ceiling when a stronger gust rattled the upper windows. The smell of baking bread filled the air, mingling with the faint tang of the coal fire, and the damp wool of coats hung near the door to dry. The warmth was deep and even, and for a time it seemed the outside world could do little more than press itself against the walls and wait. As the evening settled, Mary made one last check through the lower rooms. In the dining room, the curtains were drawn fully closed, their folds heavy and protective, muting the sound of the wind. In the hallway, the mirrors caught and doubled the lamplight, making the space feel even more secure. She paused for a moment near the front door, listening to the rain pelting the steps just beyond it, and was glad she had no reason to open it again until morning. There was a stillness to the interior now, a sense of the household drawing inwards, each person tucked into their own small sphere of warmth and work. By the time she returned upstairs, the storm was in its full voice, rain rushing against the windows, wind groaning through the chimneys, and an occasional clap of thunder rolling low across the sky. In her attic room, Mary lit her candle and set it near the bed, the flames steady despite the noise outside. She loosened her hair and sat for a moment, listening to the weather as though it were a far-off performance she need not join. The walls felt thick, the roof above solid, and she could imagine the house itself standing with quiet strength against the storm. When she finally lay down, the rain became a rhythm, the wind a distant chorus, and the warmth of her blankets a small perfect shelter that carried her easily towards sleep. From the moment Mary came down the attic stairs that morning, there was a different hum in the air, a sharper edge to the voices, a quicker rhythm to the footsteps in the hall. The family was hosting a formal dinner that evening, which meant every room in the house would be touched twice over, every surface polished to its finest gleam. The scent of beeswax was already in the drawing room as she passed through, Mrs. Porter on her knees buffing the last stretch of the sideboard, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Mary began with the silver, each piece lifted, inspected, and rubbed until the light danced on every curve. The dining room table was already being extended, its leaves slotted into place, the dark wood given a final deep polish that made it look like still water under the lamps. By late morning, the kitchen had transformed into the heart of the operation, the air warm and fragrant with roasting meats, simmering stocks, and the faint sharpness of fresh herbs. The clink of serving platters, the low murmur of timings being checked, and the occasional hiss of a pan being set down on the range made a quiet music of their own. Mary helped Anna arrange platters for cold courses, smoked fish glistening on one, jewel-bright slices of beetroot and carrot fanned on another, each covered and set aside until the appointed hour. Between tasks, she slipped upstairs to turn down beds and lay fresh towels, small details that would go unnoticed by most guests, but which mattered all the same in a well-kept household. As dusk approached, the house shifted again. Lamps were lit in every hallway, their light pooled in warm circles that softened the rich shadows between doorways. Mary moved through the dining room, placing the folded linen napkins just so, aligning the silver cutlery with a precision born of practice. Candlesticks were set at even intervals along the table, their polished bases reflecting the faint flicker of the first flames. In the drawing room, small arrangements of flowers had been placed in porcelain vases, their petals glowing softly under the lamplight. The atmosphere was one of quiet anticipation, each room holding its breath before the arrival of the guests. When the doorbell finally rang, it was with a tone of calm readiness that the household moved into action. The butler, immaculate in his dark coat, greeted each arrival while Mary slipped unobtrusively between kitchen and dining room, her footsteps silent on the thick carpets. The sound of polite conversation and occasional laughter began to swell in the front rooms, and the first course was carried in, plates laid gently before each guest with a wordless grace. In the kitchen, another rhythm took over, the quiet countdown to the next course, the muffled clink of plates being readied, the soft shuffle of shoes on the flagstones. The evening passed in a smooth, unbroken pattern, serve, clear, serve again, until the final plates were removed and coffee trays prepared. From her place near the kitchen doorway, Mary could hear the deeper, mellower tone of the guests' voices now, their laughter lower, the conversations slower. The candles on the dining table had burned down slightly, their flames steady in the calm air. Once the last tray had been brought in, she and Anna worked quietly to restore order. Cutlery returned to its places, linens carried away to be laundered, the table reduced once more to its polished expanse. By the time the last carriage rolled away into the cool night, the house had fallen back into its usual quiet. The faint scent of candle wax and roasted meat lingered in the air, mingling with the low, steady crackle of the kitchen fire. Mary climbed the attic stairs slowly, feeling the day's work in her shoulders, but with a certain contentment that came from a job well done. Outside, the street was hushed, the lamplight catching in the damp patches on the cobblestones, while inside, the house stood calm and still, its grand rooms returned to their evening rest. The day began earlier than most, with a thin ribbon of mist clinging low over the yard and the faintest grey light pressing at the kitchen windows. Mary stepped out into the cool morning air, the hem of her skirt brushing over the damp cobblestones as she carried the first basket to the long wooden table by the washtub. The yard smelled faintly of coal smoke drifting from the kitchen chimney, but stronger still was the clean, sharp scent of the soap flakes already waiting in the enamel bowl. The pump handle creaked as she drew the first water, steam curling gently from the bucket where it had been heated on the kitchen range. The sound of it pouring into the tub was deep and steady, echoing slightly in the stillness of the early hour. The work began with slow, deliberate rhythm, each garment lowered into the warm water, the soap worked in by hand, the fabric folding and unfolding under her fingers. The first few minutes were always the quietest, only the swish of the cloth and the soft drip of water onto the flagstones beneath. Soon, the air began to fill with the warmth of the steam rising from the tub, carrying the scent of clean linen and the faint tang of starch. Anna joined her, sleeves rolled past her elbows, bringing another basket piled high with table linens from the dining room. Together they worked without much conversation, their movements in quiet harmony, wash, rinse, wring, and pass along. As the morning light grew stronger, the yard began to change. The mist lifted from the cobblestones and sunlight caught on the damp edges of the line strung between the posts. Mary pegged the first pieces of laundry into place, each one flapping gently in the cool breeze. A white tablecloth swayed softly, followed by a row of neatly wrung napkins, their edges crisp against the light. The gentle flapping and creak of the clothesline blended with the occasional splash of water as another garment was lifted from the tub. Above them, a pair of sparrows chattered from the roofline, their small voices bright against the steady rhythm of the work. Inside the kitchen, the kettle was kept at a slow boil, ready to refresh the tub with more hot water whenever needed. The warmth followed them out into the yard in small waves, the scent of tea mingling faintly with the soap. By mid-morning, the lines were nearly full, the garments catching more and more of the sunlight as the day opened fully. The shadows on the cobblestones shortened, and the yard took on the quiet satisfaction of a task well in hand. Mary stood for a moment, stretching her back, her gaze moving over the swaying rows of linen. The breeze tugged at the fabric as though testing the seams, but each piece held firm, fluttering with a soft rustle that seemed to answer the rustling of the nearby trees. By the time the last basket was empty, the steam had faded from the washtub, leaving the water cooler and the air carrying more of the scent of drying cloth than of soap. Mary and Anna gathered the buckets and bowls, stacking them neatly against the wall, then lingered a moment longer in the yard. The sun was warmer now, catching the faint damp sheen on the stones, and the clean rows of laundry seemed almost to glow in the light. It was a quiet sight, but one that always left Mary with a small, private sense of contentment, the kind of contentment that came not from grand accomplishments, but from the steady, simple work that shaped the life of the household day after day. By the time the lamps were lit in the kitchen, the day's work had eased into a quieter rhythm. Outside, the air had grown cooler, carrying the faint scent of damp earth through the slightly open window above the sink. The sounds of the street were muted now, a distant clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the muffled call of a costermonger making his last round. Inside, the heart of the house glowed with the deep, steady warmth of the fire in the range, its embers breathing a low, constant light into the room. Mary settled at the wooden table with her mending basket, the fabric spilling over her lap in soft folds. The gentle pull of the needle through cloth was as familiar as her own breathing, a slow in, a steady draw, a small knot tightened. Each piece carried its own small story, a frayed cuff from the butler's coat, a loosened hem on one of Anna's aprons, a neatly patched tear in kitchen towel worn thin from use. She worked in a calm, unhurried way, the pile beside her slowly shifting from needs attending to neatly finished. Now and then, the kettle on the range gave a soft hiss, and Mary would rise to pour herself another cup of tea, the steam curling gently against her face before dissolving into the warm kitchen air. The tea was not particularly strong, but it was soothing, a comfort as much for the ritual as for the taste. Outside the windows, darkness had deepened fully, and the glass reflected the room back at her, the steady firelight, the pale gleam of clean crockery on the shelves, and her own small figure moving quietly at the table. From the corridor came the faint murmur of voices as the others finished their evening tasks. Footsteps passed softly, doors closed with muted clicks, and little by little the house settled into its nighttime hush. Mary finished her last piece of mending and laid it in the basket, her fingers lingering a moment on the smooth fabric. She rose, placing the chair neatly under the table, and took one last turn about the kitchen, checking the fire, turning the kettle so it sat just so on the hob, making certain every small thing was in its place. When she finally stepped away from the warmth of the hearth, the quiet seemed to expand around her. Upstairs, in her small attic room, the cool air was still, the only sound the faint creak of the floorboards under her feet. She set her candle on the bedside table, loosened her hair, and sat for a moment with her hands folded in her lap. The day's work was done, the fire banked, the house in order. She felt the calm weight of it settle gently over her, like a quilt drawn up in the stillness. And as she slipped into bed, the echo of the fire's warmth seemed to follow her, carrying her softly towards sleep. The frost had crept in during the night, leaving every surface touched with a thin, glittering coat of ice. Even before Mary opened her eyes, she could feel the sharp edge of the cold in the air, the way it made the wool of her blanket feel heavier, the sheets beneath cooler to the touch. In the dim blue light that filtered through the attic window, her breath curled faintly in the air, small clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. She rose slowly, her bare feet seeking the rug beside her bed, and reached for her shawl, wrapping it snugly around her shoulders before striking the match to light her candle. The stairs to the kitchen were cooler still, the wood faintly creaking beneath her careful steps. From the scullery came the muffled sound of Mrs. Porter already at work, coaxing the kitchen range back to life after the night. The fire was low, but its faint glow was a welcome sight against the pale chill of the room. Mary knelt to add kindling, the small twigs catching quickly, their scent sharp and dry as the flames began to grow. Soon the first wave of warmth began to seep outward, slow but steady, pushing back the cold that had settled into the stones overnight. Her first task was to fill the kettles, one for tea, one for the wash water, and set them on the hob. The pump handle felt icy beneath her fingers, the water biting cold as it poured into the pail. Each small action seemed to carry its own quiet reward. The hiss of water meeting the hot iron, the gradual softening of the air in the room, the comfort of knowing the household would wake to a kitchen already stirred into life. Outside, the frost still lay thick on the cobblestones, catching the early light in 1,000 tiny points that shimmered like powdered glass. Through the window, Mary could see the street beginning to stir. A lone milk cart passed, the pony's breath billowing in the air, and somewhere nearby a stable door creaked open, followed by the steady rhythm of hooves being cleaned. The sound was softened by the muffling snow that had fallen sometime after midnight, only a thin layer, but enough to lend every step and wheel a muted hush. It was the kind of morning that made the indoors feel like a world apart, every small comfort amplified by the cold just beyond the door. By the time the rest of the servants began to appear, the fire was burning strong, the kettle beginning its gentle rattle on the hob. Coats and shawls were hung to warm on the chair backs, fingers held out toward the fire for a moment's thawing before the day's work began. The first scent of tea filled the air, blending with the faint smokiness of the fresh coal, and as Mary poured the hot water over the leaves, she felt that quiet satisfaction, the kind that came not from haste or grand gestures, but from steady work done in the right order, at the right time, on a morning when the frost still clung to every window pane. The first hint of morning came not as light, but as a softness in the air, that mild, almost fragrant stillness that belongs only to spring. Mary stirred before the sun had fully risen, aware of the faint bird-song drifting through the attic window and the distant creak of cart wheels in the street. She rose with an ease she had not felt in months, the chill of winter replaced by a gentler warmth that seemed to invite her out into the day. A pale wash of gold touched the rooftops beyond the glass, and the smell of damp earth and new leaves carried even into her small room. By the time she reached the kitchen, Mrs. Porter was already laying out baskets for the market trip, strong willow frames lined with folded cloths to cradle the day's purchases. The fire burned lower than in the colder months, enough to warm the room without chasing away the freshness drifting in from the open back door. Anna was checking the small coins in the household purse, arranging them neatly in her gloved hand before tucking them away. The air was filled with a quiet sense of purpose, the kind that came with knowing the morning would be spent among stalls of bright produce, fragrant herbs, and the cheerful noise of bargaining voices. Stepping outside, Mary felt the difference immediately. The cobblestones were still damp from a light shower in the night, their surface glistening in the early light. A gentle breeze moved through the street, carrying the mingled scents of fresh bread from the baker's shop and the faint sweetness of lilacs blooming in a nearby garden. As they walked, the hum of the market grew steadily louder, the rhythmic thud of crates being set down, the clink of bottles against each other, and the low murmur of traders calling out their goods as they arranged them in neat, tempting displays. The market square was a tapestry of colour and sound. Stalls were piled high with greens so fresh they still carried drops of dew, baskets of early strawberries glowing like jewels, and rows of jars catching the sunlight in shades of amber and gold. Mary paused to admire a stall of fresh eggs, their shells in gentle shades from cream to pale blue, before selecting a dozen to wrap carefully in cloth. At another table, bunches of herbs released their perfume with each passing touch, rosemary sharp and clean, thyme warm and earthy, mint as bright as the morning itself. As the baskets grew heavier, the air seemed even softer, the sun slipping higher and spilling warmth across the square. A fiddler had taken a place near the fountain, his bow drawing out a slow, wandering tune that wound itself gently through the bustle. Mary and Anna moved from stall to stall with unhurried steps, stopping to greet familiar faces, weighing apples in the hand, or pausing to sample a sliver of fresh cheese from a smiling vendor. By the time they turned back toward home, the square was growing busier, but their pace remained slow, each step carrying the scent of the market with them: bread, herbs, fruit, and the faint floral trace of the day's first blossoms. When they reached the house, the kitchen welcomed them with its familiar, grounded calm. Baskets were set on the table, cloths unfolded, and the morning's purchases laid out for Mrs. Porter's inspection. The colours of spring, green, red, gold, seemed to glow in the lamplight, even here indoors. And as Mary rinsed the first bunch of carrots in the scullery sink, she thought how market days in spring always seemed to bring a brightness to the household, a lightness in the air that lingered long after the last basket was unpacked. By midday, the heat had settled over the house like a heavy quilt, wrapping every room in stillness. The air in the kitchen was warm, carrying the mingled scents of fresh bread cooling on the sideboard and the faint sweetness of strawberries in a bowl by the window. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to tick a little more slowly in the quiet. Mary had finished her morning tasks and stepped out into the garden, her wide straw hat shading her face from the full strength of the sun. The garden lay in a gentle doze. Bees hummed lazily between the lavender bushes, their low, steady drone blending with the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a wandering breeze. The flower beds blazed with colour, roses heavy on their stems, daisies bright against the green, tall foxgloves swaying ever so slightly. The air was thick with the scent of warm earth and cut grass, mingling with the sharper perfume of herbs planted near the kitchen door: rosemary, mint, and thyme, their leaves releasing fragrance at the slightest touch. Mary carried a basket for gathering what was needed for the evening meal: a handful of ripe tomatoes glowing like small suns in the light, a bunch of parsley for garnish, a few tender lettuce leaves still cool from the shade. She moved slowly along the rows, enjoying the quiet rhythm of the work. In the far corner, the kitchen cat lay stretched out in a patch of sunlight, its tail flicking lazily in time with the bees' hum. Now and then the faint sound of a carriage would drift over from the street, softened by the thick hedges that bordered the garden. But here, time seemed to move at a different pace. Mary paused by the old bench under the chestnut tree, setting down her basket and resting for a moment in the dappled shade. From there, she could see the shimmer of heat above the rooftops beyond, the deep blue of the summer sky broken only by the drifting shape of a single white cloud. When she rose again, the shadows had shifted, stretching longer across the lawn. The day still held the warmth of early afternoon, but in the garden's quiet corners, the air was beginning to cool. Mary made her way back toward the house, the basket now fragrant with fresh-picked greens and herbs. As she stepped into the kitchen, the slight dimness felt soothing after the brightness outside. She set the basket on the table, washed her hands at the sink, and began laying out the vegetables for Mrs. Porter to inspect. The garden's peace seemed to follow her in, clinging to her skirts like the faint scent of rosemary on her fingertips. By late afternoon, the sky had drawn low and heavy, its grey pressing close over the rooftops. The first drops of rain began as a faint tapping against the kitchen window, so light that Mary at first thought it was only the wind brushing a branch across the glass. But soon the sound deepened into a steady patter, filling the air with a soft, unhurried rhythm that seemed to slow everything else in the house. The fire in the range glowed warmly, the orange light flickering against the black iron, and the air was filled with the mingled scents of roasting meat, baking bread, and the faint tang of wood smoke drifting down the chimney. The work for the day had been lighter than most, the early darkness bringing the household inside sooner. Mary moved about the kitchen with an easy pace, wiping down the table, checking the simmering pot on the hob, and pausing now and then to watch the rain streak down the window panes. Outside, the cobblestones shone slick in the lamplight, puddles catching small reflections of passing figures hurrying along under umbrellas. The sound of carriage wheels was softened by the wet streets, their rattle muted to a gentle swish as the horses splashed through the shallow water. Anna joined her, bringing in the last basket of kindling from the covered store. They worked together without much conversation, each task a small comfort in the dim, warm glow of the kitchen. Mary laid a cloth over the bread to keep in its heat, the fabric holding the scent of fresh crust and flour. She poured 2 cups of tea, the steam curling upward and carrying with it the faint fragrance of the leaves. They drank in companionable silence, listening to the rain deepen and the occasional gust of wind rattle the shutters. By the time the evening meal was finished and the plates cleared, the rain had become a steady curtain outside. The kitchen felt almost like a separate world, a place apart from the damp chill beyond the walls. Mary sat near the hearth, the firelight touching her face as she mended a small tear in a dishcloth. Each pull of the needle was slow, measured, her thoughts drifting lazily in the quiet. The sound of the rain and the steady hiss of the fire seemed to weave together into a single, calming hum, wrapping the room in warmth. When the last tasks were done, Mary took one final look around the kitchen, making sure everything was in its place. The kettle set on the hob for morning, the fire banked just enough to last the night, the windows latched against the wind. She stepped out into the corridor, the rain's steady music following her faintly as she climbed the stairs. In her small attic room, she could still hear it on the roof, a gentle percussion that seemed to match the slowing beat of her heart. She undid her hair, folded her shawl neatly at the foot of the bed, and lay back against the pillow. The rain did not stop as she drifted towards sleep. It only softened, fading into the kind of sound that seems to belong to dreams. Mary awoke to a stillness so complete that for a moment she thought she had risen before the world itself. There was no rattle of cartwheels in the street, no muffled hoofbeats, not even the distant cry of a morning vendor. The air in her attic room was cool and faintly bright, the light that filtered through the curtains softer than usual, almost glowing. She rose, wrapping her shawl about her shoulders, and moved to the window. Outside, the street had been remade. A deep, even layer of snow covered the cobblestones, the rooftops, and the bare branches of the trees, softening every edge and curve. No footprints yet marked the smooth surface, and the usual grey of the city had been replaced by a pale, unbroken white. The sky above was a muted silver, heavy with the promise that more snow might fall before day's end. It was a sight that seemed to draw the breath a little slower, as though it should not be disturbed too quickly. Downstairs, the kitchen felt warmer than usual, the fire built up high against the morning's cold. The windows were clouded with steam from the kettle, blurring the view of the snow-covered garden beyond. The familiar sounds of work were softened, the gentle clink of teacups, the creak of the scullery door, all somehow quieter, as though the snow's hush outside had settled within the house as well. Mrs. Porter moved about in thick-soled slippers, her voice low, while Anna returned from the coal store with small flakes still clinging to her hair. Tasks that morning took on a slower rhythm. There was no need to fetch from market in the early hours. Instead, the day began with simple work indoors. polishing the silver, sorting linens, baking bread to fill the house with warmth and scent. Now and then, Mary would pause at the kitchen window to watch the snow drifting gently down again, each flake tumbling in a soft, meandering path before it joined the rest. By midday, the first footprints appeared along the street, a postman making careful steps, a small dog bounding ahead and leaving a scatter of prints. The sound of the world returned in softened form, the faint jingle of harness bells, the slow creak of a wagon moving through the whitened road. But within the house the quiet held, deep and steady. The fire glowed in the grate, tea steamed in the pot, and the scent of fresh bread lingered like a comfort. When evening came, the snow still lay thick, untouched in the corners where the lamplight did not reach. Mary banked the fire and took one last look from the window before drawing the curtains. The world beyond seemed far away, a muffled, peaceful place under its heavy white quilt. And as she climbed the attic stairs, the quiet followed her, so deep it seemed she could carry it into her dreams. The day moved along in a kind of softened quiet, the snow outside reflecting so much light that even the corners of the house felt brighter. Each time Mary went to fetch something from the pantry, she caught herself pausing by the kitchen window to watch the flakes drift down, their paths slow and meandering like scraps of lace caught in an invisible current. The snow seemed to change not just the view but the sound of the world, muffling the street, muting the clatter of the occasional passing cart until it became no more than a distant rhythmic hush. Around midday, Mrs. Porter decided a pot of stew would be the heart of the evening meal. Mary helped peel carrots and turnips, their bright colours a cheerful contrast against the white beyond the window. The steady work filled the kitchen with warmth and scent, the earthy sweetness of root vegetables, the savoury steam rising from the pot, the faint crackle of the fire as a new log settled into the embers. It was the sort of day where time passed almost without notice, marked only by the slow deepening of the stew's aroma and the shift of light as afternoon edged closer to evening. By the time the lamps were lit, the snow had thickened again, falling in larger flakes now, each one tumbling slowly, catching in the lamplight before vanishing into the whiteness below. Mary stepped briefly into the back garden to shake the crumbs from the breadboard, her breath misting in the air. The snow muffled every step, making the world seem impossibly still, as if the whole street were holding its breath. Inside, the kitchen felt even more welcoming after the bite of cold. The stew was ready, the bread sliced and spread with butter that softened almost instantly in the warm air. The meal was eaten quietly, spoons dipping in unhurried rhythm, the comfort of the food matched by the deep sense of shelter from the cold beyond. After the plates were washed and set aside, Mary lingered by the fire a moment longer than usual, watching the flames bend and sway. When at last she climbed to her attic room, she paused at the window before drawing the curtains. The rooftops were buried under soft, clean lines of snow, the streets below empty save for a single lamplighter making his rounds, his figure blurred in the falling white. She turned from the window, the faint glow from the street lamps casting gentle shadows on her walls, and settled into bed with the quiet certainty that the snow would still be there when morning came, unchanged, undisturbed, and waiting. Morning came with a brighter light than usual, spilling into Mary's attic room before she had even opened her eyes. The snowfall had stopped sometime in the night, leaving behind a world transformed, crisp, white, and glinting in the early sun. The rooftops glittered under their thick covering, and the bare trees along the street held delicate lines of frost along every branch. The air was sharper than the day before, but clearer too, carrying the kind of cold that seemed to lift the senses. When Mary stepped into the kitchen, the windows shone with the pale brightness of the morning. The snow in the garden lay undisturbed, save for the small paw prints of the kitchen cat, weaving their way toward the shed. The fire had been built high to chase away the chill, and the room smelled faintly of wood smoke and tea. Mrs. Porter had already set a pan of porridge on the hob, its soft bubbling adding to the quiet rhythm of the room. By mid-morning, the sound of life began to return to the street. A baker's boy passed with a basket on his arm, his boots crunching sharply on the frozen snow. Two boys rolled a large snowball across the cobbles, their laughter carrying in the crisp air. The postman moved with careful steps, leaving neat tracks behind him. From the kitchen window, Mary watched a cart make its slow way along the road, the horse's breath puffing in clouds, its hooves kicking up tiny flurries. Inside, the work was simple but steady. Mary polished the dining silver until it caught the winter light, fetched coal from the store, and laid out fresh cloths for the afternoon tea service. Every so often, she would glance outside to see the marks of the day's activity slowly filling the street: footprints, wheel ruts, the patchy beginnings of a snowman near the corner. The sharp whiteness of the morning had softened into a lived-in winter scene, though still beautiful in its own way. By late afternoon, the sun had shifted low, touching the snow with a faint gold. Shadows stretched long and blue across the garden, and the chill deepened once more. Mary brought in the last of the firewood before dark, shaking a light dusting of snow from her skirt as she closed the door. The house settled into its evening quiet, the fire's glow bright against the deepening cold outside. And when she finally climbed to her attic, she thought how the snow had given the city two different faces in 2 days, one untouched, still and hushed, and one softened by life returning to its streets. Mary woke before dawn, the pale glow of moonlight still lying across her attic ceiling. The air in her room was sharp with the night's cold, making the quilt's weight all the more comforting. She rose slowly, pulling on her thickest stockings and wrapping her shawl tight before making her way downstairs. The house was still in shadow, the only sound the faint ticking of the long case clock in the hall. In the kitchen, the fire had been coaxed to life just enough to warm the range. A small pot of tea steamed quietly, and beside it Mrs. Porter had placed a short list and a cloth purse. Today's errand would be to the market for a few fresh items needed for the midday meal. Mary sipped her tea while the kettle whispered on the hob, the warmth settling in her hands before she stepped out into the early morning. The world outside was washed in silver and pale gold, the first threads of sunrise threading through the cold. Frost coated every surface: cobblestones, window ledges, iron railings, each catching the light so they seemed almost dusted with glass. Her boots crunched over the frozen ground, each step sending a faint, satisfying echo into the still air. Breath rose in small clouds before her, and from somewhere far off came the slow, muffled clop of hooves on ice. The streets were quiet, only a few others braving the cold this early. A milkman setting bottles on doorsteps, his breath steaming in the air. A woman carrying a covered basket, her face hidden beneath a woolen scarf. The market itself was only beginning to stir. Stalls stood in neat rows, their awnings heavy with frost, and traders moved slowly between them, stamping their feet for warmth as they unpacked baskets of apples, potatoes, and carrots that glowed with colour in the pale light. Mary went about her purchases with care: a small loaf still warm from the baker's oven, a bundle of leeks, a wedge of pale cheese wrapped in paper. The smell of fresh bread followed her as she tucked each item into her basket. Now and then she exchanged a quiet greeting with a familiar stallholder, the words curling into the cold air before fading like breath. By the time she turned back toward the house, the sun had risen fully, laying a soft golden sheen over the frosted rooftops. The air was still cold enough to nip at her cheeks, but the light gave the day a gentler edge. When she stepped back into the kitchen, the warmth wrapped around her instantly, carrying with it the scent of the morning fire and the quiet reassurance of home. She set the basket on the table, shook the frost from her shawl, and began unpacking the morning's finds, each item a small bright note against the winter's pale canvas. By the time the day's work was finished, the winter sky had long since darkened. The last traces of daylight faded into the deep indigo of evening. The lamps in the hall and kitchen cast soft pools of gold against the walls, their light catching the edges of polished wood and the faint gleam of brass. The rest of the house was hushed. The family retired to the drawing room upstairs, leaving the servants' quarters in a quiet all their own. Mary set a small kettle on the hob, its faint hiss mingling with the gentle ticking of the clock on the mantel. The fire burned low but steady, its glow reaching out in flickers that played across the tiled hearth. The air smelled faintly of coal and the lingering scents of supper: baked bread, roasted vegetables, and the warm spice of nutmeg from the pudding served earlier. Anna joined her, carrying in a small basket of mending. They settled side by side near the fire, their chairs drawn just close enough to feel the heat on their knees. Mary took up a stocking with a small tear at the heel, the needle glinting briefly in the lamplight as she began to stitch. Outside, the wind moved softly along the walls of the house, a low sigh that rose and fell against the steady warmth within. Every so often the kettle's hiss deepened into a gentle rattle, and Mary would rise to pour out 2 cups of tea. The steam curled upward, carrying the faint fragrance of the leaves, and they drank in silence, their thoughts moving as slowly as the flames in the grate. Now and then Anna would speak, her voice low, about something small, a neighbour seen in the street that afternoon, a new ribbon in a shop window. And Mary would answer with a quiet murmur before the silence folded back around them. The hours slipped by almost unnoticed. The fire sank to a warm bed of embers, the lamplight softened to a gentle glow, and the house felt as though it had drawn in on itself, holding in its warmth against the night beyond. When the clock finally chimed the hour, they rose, setting aside their mending and empty teacups. Mary lingered a moment longer by the hearth, letting the last threads of heat touch her face, before carrying the quiet with her up the narrow stairs to her attic room. Outside, the frost was already settling on the rooftops once more, but within, the memory of the fire's glow lingered like a gentle weight in the dark.